All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to call to order the Thursday, June 17th, 2021 meeting for the DCTF number 19. I now will call staff, or Leslie, please call the roll.
Thank you. Member Thompson.
Here.
Member Ondrasek.
Here.
Member Mayer.
Here.
Member Von Hoon. Member Von Hoon did send an email saying she would be absent today. Member Vargas Smith. Lucky her. Member Reed.
Here.
Member Coyne.
Here.
Member Tai.
Here.
And Member Varjane.
Yep.
Let the record show all members are in attendance with the exception of Member Von Hoon.
Is there a motion to excuse or not excuse Member Von Hoon this evening? Hoon?
Motion to excuse.
I second.
All right. All in favor of excusing Member Von Hoon this evening, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. The motion passes. Member Von Hoon is excused. Leslie, would you please read the DCTF meeting procedures into the record?
Thank you. Meetings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the DCTF directs all activity during the meeting. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. Special procedures or time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Copies of the current agenda and staff reports for each of the items on the agenda are available online on the Downtown Precise Plan website, as well as on the City Clerk's website. Chair?
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. We'll now move to the consent calendar.
The procedure for the consent calendar is as follows. Consent calendar items may be enacted or approved by one motion unless requested to be removed by anyone for discussion or explanation. We have one item on the consent calendar this evening, and that is the Downtown Community Task Force meeting minutes of the May 20th, 21 meeting.
Is there anyone who would like to pull this for discussion, or are we okay to approve? We're not approving.
Make a motion. Right? Yeah, you make a motion.
Okay,
oh,
you do?
sorry,
Okay.
That dropped off of there.
No worries. Would
motion
anybody
to
like to make a
accept.
motion to approve, or would we like to discuss the meeting minutes from the last meeting of May 20th, 2021?
Make a motion to move.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. All in favor in approving the meeting minutes from the May 20, 2021 meeting, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. All right, the meeting minutes are approved. So we'll move on to general business items. Leslie?
So our first item on the agenda is acceptance of the preferred land use plan for the Downtown Precise Plan. There was a short staff report on this item. And I don't know, Jim and Peter, if you want to go ahead, do you want to go through your first couple of slides in the presentation before they discuss and vote?
Sure. And I would say I would amend it to be the downtown framework plan rather than land use plan. Since it encompasses other issues besides land use.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Leslie, Rena is hanging out in the audience. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, thank you.
So should I just briefly, do you want us to go right to that, Leslie? Or there's a couple of just intro slides before that. Should
skip
those?
Go ahead and go. Yeah, skip those and go right to that. Yeah, because you had good slides. So.
Yep. Okay. Go ahead and skip ahead, Deeksha. All right. And Peter, do you want to go ahead and go through these?
Yeah, sure. So just we will not do all this background material that we've presented before because I think we're all very steeped in it, but just grounding us in our values that I think were established with the task force and the community early in the process, that downtown should be authentic, adaptable, and affordable. And the way that translates to the place itself, which really will be the subject of today's meeting. A lot of conversation both before this process began and during this process of what the downtown environment should include. In terms of streets and public spaces, there's been, I think, a lot of agreement on a restored street grid, multimodal streets, an active and pedestrian scaled Franklin Street, open spaces for community gathering, lots of outdoor seating. And in terms of urban form, buildings that have a human scale and create pedestrian comfort, building height variation and diversity, a mix of uses, and stepping down to the neighborhood context. So what is the framework plan? And you'll notice a little difference in language here. We were calling it the preferred plan. I hope this doesn't confuse. It's trying to clarify that this set of elements that we've been working through with the task force and city staff really represents the framework for the precise plan. It is the structure on which the rest of the plan will be supported by. So on to the next slide. The first of these elements is streets and public spaces. So in keeping with these values that have been established, I think, for years now, starting with reclaiming our downtown and through this process, the importance of reclaiming and reestablishing the street grid. Not only reestablishing the street grid, but recognizing and creating, defining a series of street types, each of which is distinct and supports a different experience and to a certain extent, a different prioritization of users and modes and activities. And also this diagram is establishing 3 key public spaces. One public space being what we're calling Lafayette Gateway, at the entrance to downtown, that nexus between downtown and the university, that critical space that we believe is likely to come first. And then at the other end of the downtown, Franklin Square, building on that existing space and the historic post office and the farmers market and the activity there, recognizing the importance of all that and wanting to carry that forward into downtown in the future. And then finally, a larger and maybe the most important space in the long term, the central, what we're calling now the Central Grove. The next element of the framework plan is what we're calling essential land use. And the idea here is that the precise plan doesn't need to be extremely prescriptive about land use overall, but there are certain aspects of land use that are very, very important to achieving the kind of downtown that is described in that foundational vision. And the most important part of that may be the focusing of active uses, primarily retail, but also providing a bit of flexibility there, recognizing that the retail market is not endless, at least especially now, but concentrating that retail activity along Franklin Street, all the way from Lafayette to Madison. And then second, recognize the importance of some catalyst cultural uses, the importance of cultural activity to creating a downtown that really feels like a downtown. And that might be performance spaces and theaters, might be something else. Those are the cultural catalysts that we focused on. And we've identified potential locations for those where those catalyst uses may be most beneficial because they will come early. They're sites that are likely to be available earlier, and because of their relationship with other elements of downtown and the surroundings. And then third, urban form. This diagram is a little bit different than the others in the sense that this diagram itself may not be the regulating diagram in the plan, but is intended to show a good outcome, a likely urban form outcome, sort of generalized in terms of building envelopes, but creating the generalized building form that the plan should try to create with a regulating plan in the document. And the key, just to back up for a moment, the key aspects of this are concentrating the taller buildings closest to the core of downtown around the Central Grove, and away from the more sensitive parts of the surrounding neighborhood, but creating that nucleus of activity. And notably, those taller buildings are also, based on our economic analysis, that is the scale that will accommodate office use. And in order to get a mixture of uses, we want to be able to accommodate office development somewhere in downtown. We expect that it won't be everywhere, and it's certainly right now, residential leads the market. But in order to try to get some mix of office, there's a need to have some taller buildings, and we're concentrating those near the center.
And this part of the framework plan establishes those maximum heights along specific street frontages. And so there are blocks that allow taller heights, and there are blocks that that allow heights that don't come up to those same levels. And those center blocks are the ones that Peter is mentioning specifically that would allow taller heights that would accommodate commercial office.
Correct. You'll also notice one taller building on the corner of Benton and Lafayette, which has the potential to be sort of a landmark for the district and be seen and help to establish the identity of the district from the outside. I think the other key point here is the idea of stepping down, particularly to Benton, to both Benton and Homestead, to the north and south, and also then in a more gradual way, stepping down to the west toward the neighborhood. So I think the other thing that that we haven't talked about as much, but is really key to us being all comfortable using this framework plan, acknowledging it and accepting it and approving it, is understanding how it gets used. So this is trying to map out, this slide is trying to map out how do these elements of the framework plan feed into the precise plan and then ultimately to implementation. So with streets and public spaces, this diagram will become the circulation diagram in the plan. It is the basis for street cross sections, which we have begun to produce, and we'll be sharing those with you this evening. Similarly, the basis for public space conceptual plans, and then ultimately policies and design guidelines for streets and public spaces. The essential land use diagram will become that, a regulating plan diagram with associated policies for land use. And the urban form diagram will also become a diagram that will become more specific in terms of building heights and massing and guidelines demonstrating the intent for ground floor interface, building height, and massing. Then there's a next step, which is implementation, and that both comes in terms of the regulatory documents, the zoning code, potentially a form-based code, which we hope will come through. Also public actions in terms of right-of-way dedication, capital improvements, and so on. And then ultimately private actions, the actual land consolidation and development.
Leslie, you're muted.
Thank you, Jim and Peter. So this is the first item again on our agenda, and staff is asking the task force to vote to accept the framework plan. And with that, I'll open it up to the chair, rest of the task force, if you want to have any discussion.
Deeksha, do you want to unshare so that the
Oh yeah,
task force can see each other?
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Thank you. Are there any questions from the DCTF members? Please raise your hand. Nobody has any questions?
I see Atisha.
Oh, there we go. I'm going up and down. Okay, go ahead, Atisha. Sorry. I was going
Deeksha,
up and
could
down.
you share the last slide, please, with the whole implementation policies? So my kind of quick question is, like the last diagram with the urban farm, how closely are we going to write that, if we write that in form-based code, that someone can change or not change? Like, I do kind of have some concerns with the current urban form we are seeing, and as an architect, I would like to have a little bit more flexibility when I'm designing this. So just trying to understand, like, what we see, is this the final building envelope we are, committing ourselves to, at least in the diagram 3.
These are maximums, correct?
Well, yeah.
So you layer
okay.
on top of that the urban form,
Yeah.
urban design requirements.
Yeah, so there are different parts of the answer to that question. The first part is what's included in the precise plan versus the form-based code. So I think the precise plan would be trying to define minimum and maximum heights and some general guidelines about variations that can occur within that overall envelope, which is, I think, what you're getting at, Atisha. The form-based code would go into more detail about what those variations might be. And it may be that Andrew or David want to weigh in on that, but we would be looking at, the articulation of building facades, the way, arcades and galleries are used, if there are setbacks, that sort of thing, and how those elements are shaped and how they're regulated.
And I would think that in the precise plan, there'd be the opportunity to clearly describe with words and illustrations the intent and the why and the to what end these types of articulation would occur, how that ties to the memory of the downtown that used to be there, how that achieves goals of authenticity, scale, organized variety, etc. And then the code would just say, okay, so do this.
So just kind of a question, if someone wants to come and do a really beautiful spherical building, or, like do a really artistic performance center, are they stuck to doing box looking buildings, or they'll
Not
have
at
the
all.
flexibility to play around with architecture?
Well, what we would normally, what we would often include in a code would be an exception for civic or cultural buildings that, if somebody wanted to build a church here, they could have a steeple, whereas you wouldn't want a tall thing on an apartment building. And, I think similarly, if we tend to provide guidelines, but not hard standards for civic buildings and cultural landmarks. Now that can lead to unexpected results if you get somebody like Frank, Gary putting a building in the middle of here. Anyway, so, but we would recommend that you have some latitude for unique community oriented or civic or governmental buildings.
Got it. Thank you.
We can talk about that a lot more as the code goes together, for sure. Okay, you want to have some guardrails,
Yeah.
because very often the public, historically, the public buildings were sort of the crowning glory of most cities. That isn't necessarily the pattern these days, where schools often end up looking a little more like mini storage than an edifice, Anyway, so that's an important subject to discuss.
You must have seen the Bookster box, David.
I'm not thinking of anything in particular, and certainly not in Santa Clara, but well, you've got that little library in your historic park.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Dan, I see your hand up.
Yep, got it. Figured that out after 10 minutes. Is there a way that we could flash back onto the retail slide on That section, is that a
Yeah.
pain to do?
The essential uses. Nope.
Yeah, correct. Okay. So in blocks D and C, the pink is entertainment civic uses.
No, that's sorry, that's retail ready.
Okay, retail ready. Got it. Okay. I misread that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is, we discussed that. That's retail ready. Okay, very good. Okay, so that answers that. And then you had mentioned, I think, Benton and Lafayette, the corner, as a highlight to the announcement of the downtown. How is that envisioned? Through signage, or, you know, I know it's up for debate and so forth, but
Really through a building form with additional allowable height here to create a landmark building.
okay. So it would be architecturally.
Yep.
Okay.
And there, I mean, again, it's possible to note special sites like that might have some additional opportunities in terms of signage.
Right.
I mean, I can imagine, one of my favorite buildings in the world is the hotel in downtown Merced that has a big roof sign that lights up at night, so you could see it from the train station when you pulled into Merced in like 1915. You know, for the one on the Grand Theater at the north end of Lake Merritt in Oakland.
Yeah, my buddy's working on that right now.
Well, there you go. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if this ended up being like a 7 or 8 story hotel, what do you think about a sign on the roof that says, you know, Santa Clara Hotel?
No, it's great.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it would be possible to put a variety of special allowances on key sites.
Okay,
And we
great.
could discuss all those.
Great. And then last question I had is on heights. We did discuss at length, kind of gravitating towards the heights in the center. Where do you see, what was the height count on Lafayette? Let's say the corner of Lafayette and Homestead. Is that 6 stories?
That would be the same as that existing building, which I believe is 6 stories.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. So
Okay,
that
good.
that could either be, you know, preserving that building in place, or it could be another building that would be of similar form. and
Very
height.
good. Okay, good. Okay, I just wanted clarification on those 3. Thank you. I'm going to lower my hand.
You
I'm gonna
have lowered your hand.
lower my hand. That will take about 10 minutes.
That's okay.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I see
All right.
Butch has his hand up.
I see Butch Coyne. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was looking for my notes from one of our last meetings and just can't put my hands on it. So I'm trying to get a refresher. We had discussed looking at Monroe and Franklin Street and making that a mini gateway coming into the downtown. We've got the main gateway at Lafayette and Franklin, but with Valley Fair and traffic coming in that direction, we had a short discussion about how can we call attention to and recognize the value of that area on Monroe and Franklin Street, whether it was additional public space, whether it was a way to create a mini gateway, something of that nature. And looking at the way we have it right now, we haven't seemed to address that. So I don't know if we want to address it, if we're fine with what we have, but I just thought I would throw that out and see where it would go.
I wonder if, I don't remember the specifics of that conversation, Butch, but I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit more about what level of gateway might be appropriate. You know, on this Benton and Lafayette, we're really seeing the architecture as an opportunity for creating landmark and gateway. There can be different levels of gateway, from, you know, more sculptural or pillar elements or arches and things like that. Are you thinking of something specific?
Not being an architect, no. But I think the approach we want to take is that main corridor besides Lafayette is going to be Monroe. We also know with the way Valley Fair is growing and developing, we should make that natural connection of coming down Monroe to hit downtown Santa Clara. So my original question when this discussion was a meeting or two ago was, what's going to prevent somebody from just driving down the street, driving right by it and never realizing there's a downtown? So I don't think it should be the main gateway, but something that calls attention that says, hey, we're here. This is where you should be coming to, drawing attention to them as you're driving down Monroe Street, whatever that may be. The second question was pertaining to the public space where the post office is. Are we ignoring from the post office down to Monroe Street by not having some sort of public space or something for the merchants, for the residents on that end of downtown too? And I'm not talking a massive park or anything massive, but just, it seems like as we move down Franklin Street from Lafayette, less and less excitement, less and less reason for me to walk down to the end of that block and come back, turn around and come back again.
Yeah.
So
where's the punch at
we're
Monroe?
right. So again, Jim, I have no concept of what it should be. It's just, I think we've got two ends of this downtown. It'd be nice to be able to say, doesn't matter which end you come in, the grand entrance or the secondary entrance, there are two entrances to get into the downtown.
Yeah.
That's my point. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think our team can give that some
We
thought.
agree. We agree, for sure.
Thank you, Butch. Are there any other members of the DCTF? If not, I'll make a couple, ask a couple questions. So one of the things that I have is, there's a bunch of components that make up the overall 10 blocks. And so what is the mechanism? I mean, we have all this open space and retail and, housing and all these different things in the mix. Is there like a specific amount of each one that's kind of dictated within the plan? And then what I'm really kind of getting at is, if the plan is going to go, and be the guide for, future RFPs, development and council and, the community. And if something gets missed along the way, or something changes, like something is a better use than what we have today because the market changes or something like that, is there a way that we don't kick the can too far before we lose that, a component or two and make it less than what it could be? How does the plan protect against that, I guess?
Go ahead, Peter.
I'll just take a stab at that. I think that the precise plan, by establishing the building envelope, essentially, will create that overall ceiling of development, and it won't be use specific.
Okay.
So if there's more demand for some use that we're not anticipating now, there's nothing in this document that should prevent that from happening. It's an important thing for us to keep in mind so that we write it in a way that it doesn't prevent those good things from happening.
But one point that has been brought up is that we would like to create, diversified land use, right? In favor of a 24-hour downtown. So, in the ideal world, if market wasn't a factor, we'd like a mix of office and residential. And one mechanism we talked about to try to get that, well, one is the allowable heights that we talked about in the center blocks, which would tend to encourage office. The other mechanism we talked about was caps. So do you want to put a cap, for example, on both office and residential to make sure you don't get 100% of either? And those caps could be different, right? The cap for residential might be higher. Cap for office might be lower, but at least establish some sort of a limit so that you're encouraging a mixture of the two.
And it could be done with something as simple, and I apologize if this has already been said and I missed it, but I mean, we have done that in other codes where if there's a particular use that you would like that you would hope to get that you're not sure that the market would bring on its own, you could offer, you know, like a height, you could say that the maximum height for housing is, you know, something, and for office you could have a taller building. With parameters to make sure that it doesn't become a monster.
Okay. I mean, are there, you know, and I'll use an example that I've seen in the past in Santa Clara, which is, you know, the El Camino Real, right? Which we have an FAR for retail, but we've kind of kicked that can quite a bit over the last, you know, 6 to 10 years. And one of it is because the market really hasn't bared, you know, the ability to put in small retail along a long, you know, state highway almost, right? So
Yep.
in that, you know, in the ERC plan, it's kind of captured that, but in the downtown, it's very different. So, I mean, if somebody says, hey, I want to put a hotel, and that's obviously a specific use, and that's great, but that takes part of the retail, and to try to build that, is there a formula, or not a formula, but just a rough set of guidelines so we don't go too far outside of the plan's vision?
Well, I mean, one simple way would be to require a hotel to have retail ground floor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a hotel just needs a lobby on the ground floor.
I'm just using that as an example, right? Like a specific use, but like right now, the market's going to bear housing, right? So, I mean,
well, the market's always going to bear housing. Trust me.
So we could miss the commercial component. We can miss some of the retail. We can miss some of the specialty use in today's market, right? I mean, so how does the plan make sure that there's some kind of balance over time? Because otherwise, who's going to be the custodian of this?
Well, that's an
One
interesting
thing.
question. We just spent an hour today having that exact same conversation regarding the general plan for a city of 200,000 persons. And there needs to be some kind, there can be some kind of a monitoring process where the city tracks applications, permits, square footage of you know, this, that, and the other, you know, every year, every 2 years, every 5 years. And if the market starts going in a direction that is somewhat different from what you hoped, there's always the possibility of a plan amendment. That's one of the strengths of this kind of a plan, which is a framework plan. And if the standards are focused more on making the urban form of a timeless downtown mixed use environment with flexible use, flexible parking arrangements, buildings that could be occupied in one way for, you know, 5 or 10 or 20 years and in a different way later, like downtown LA. There's lots of office buildings that are now, you know, lofts with people living in them. So if it's built in that sort of a flexible, timeless way, then the uses could be, you could have some policies in the plan regarding use preferences or target mixes, and then you can just monitor it rather than zoning one little corner coffee shop and one upper floor office.
However, Adam, because you mentioned retail specifically, I think office and residential and upper floors are much more flexible, and that's
Yes.
purposeful in our plan. But for the ground floor, I think it's what we're saying about the essential uses component of the framework plan is that those are required.
Yes.
And so what we've tried to do is be very judicious about the amounts of retail so that we're not flooding the retail market with too much brick and mortar. And the balance of it, we're putting in retail ready, you know, which can be converted to retail later if and when that demand comes. But that those are requirements of the plan, because activating those specific frontages is that important to a successful downtown.
Yeah, you can't just put ground floor apartments on Franklin, for instance.
So for the retail ready, is there a set of guidelines for making sure that the right height and
Yes.
setbacks and
Yep,
columns?
we're
and
going to talk
We've-
about that later.
utilities?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Sorry.
we've just finished that in Claremont. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that.
And then I mean, I know that the housing per square foot right now is higher per dollar than a triple net lease for retail. So we say retail ready, but if I was a developer, I mean, I'm going to go where it's easiest to rent, right? And I get the most bang for my buck. So how do we, if the market can bear the retail, how do you get them to convert it back at a later date?
We'll have to work through that with the economic team and I mean, that is the detail in which the devil lives full time.
Sorry. It's kind of, I just want to make sure that whatever we put forth is going to work long term without having somebody sitting there. And I don't want an accountant mentality, because I totally agree that, it needs to be flexible, but at the same time, kicking a can, one development's fine, but kicking it 10 developments is definitely a different thing. We'll end up with, something far different than what we've all, set forth to achieve. So, and then would the form-based code be able to protect some of these items that, I kind of mentioned? Is there ways in that form-based code to put in stipulations on, making sure that the balance is maintained over time?
Well, the red pieces that were on that diagram were intended, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but I'm quite sure they were intended to be commercial use required. It's basically ground floor commercial zoning.
Mhm.
Yep, exactly.
And you put those at key places where that's just got to be it. And then on the in-between stretches where you want to make sure it's at the very least very beautiful and pleasant to walk 100 feet from this commercial establishment to that commercial establishment. You make sure that it looks and feels and could in the future be successful retail.
And then I guess my last question right now, and I see some other hands, so I'll let some other members go, but how do we, I lost my train of thought. I was thinking of open space and stuff. I'll come back. I'll let somebody else go. Sorry, you guys sparked something and then I lost it. I was looking at the hands. I apologize. So I'll let member Reed go ahead.
Yeah, there are, relatively recent state regulations that make it a little harder than it has been historically to cap and phase uses in mixed use spaces. So I could talk to you about it, but it would probably be good for Rena and Andrew or Leslie to just weigh in as we go through this process. I don't think it's impossible to create structures that realize the vision. It's just a little more difficult than it has been in the past. And some of the tools, about capping uses have in places been abused. And so we've lost some of our control over that at the state level. So we should definitely cross-check and make sure that the goals are the tools are in place to make the plan functional.
So you're talking about housing density bonuses?
No, it's depending on the use right now, it's difficult to discourage housing development in a space.
Yeah.
The objective standards articulate that housing is a allowable use. And so
No.
in mixed use spaces, you need to, some of the tools we had to shape the use of those spaces are a little trickier right now. And so
They are trickier. Yeah. That's why it's important to get them right. And it's evolving. I mean, the legislative aides are busy, redrafting new language, while we talk.
Yeah, and that's not going to stop. So
No, it's not. They're just gonna keep fiddling.
I mean, I think it's relevant. You know, the intent here is to create flexibility to realize a vision which is, you know, totally reasonable and, you know, I'm excited about. And on the other side, I work in places where you know, the sort of rules are set to make it impossible to build pieces of the puzzle, whether they're in the plan or not. And so the state has stepped in and said, you know, if people meet your rules, you can't stand in the way of housing development. And
That's why it's important to have good rules.
okay,
Yeah, this is
wanted to bring
Andrew.
that
This
up.
is Andrew Crabtree too. My understanding of it is that a form-based code would be an objective standard, so it would actually be very helpful in that regard.
That's specifically the idea. Because if a typical zoning code will just say you can have an FAR of 2.4 and it can be up to 65 feet tall. And that could look like a lot of different things, many of which you would not ever want to look at.
Thanks, Matthew. Did you have anything else? Sorry, I don't want to.
no, that just a cautionary note.
Okay, thank you.
Completely right.
Dan, you have your hand up, or is this a holdout from you not being able to use Zoom?
No, I'm showing off with my
You're
my
up.
ability, my new abilities.
Hand
All right,
using
so-
ability.
Yeah, my hand use, yeah. So, so I want to be clear on, I had a conversation this week with somebody in New York, city manager in New York, that an idea was brought forward where they wanted more height in exchange for something very, you know, that the city wanted on the bottom. So once this is established, form-based code or precise plan form-based code, does the city have the flexibility to alter it and put something like that in?
We could build in a public benefit density bonus into the form-based code.
Okay.
We could identify priority uses like office or other things, hotel. I mean, we could identify priority uses, which would, which if they met the standards and the developer entered perhaps into a development agreement so that you were assured that you were going to get what you were being sold, then yeah, a lot of paperwork and a few lawyers probably involved there. Then
Yeah,
then you can, then they could get some, they could get some more height or something else.
right. And that, yeah, we can talk more in detail on that. So, okay, good. Thank you.
And we for the most recent one we've done, we've put together actually a design review checklist that essentially identifies, you know, a bunch of topics that are important to the community, and in this case to your committee, and then establish almost a point system so that as projects are evaluated, you have a lot of boxes that are checked and points that are made if you achieve design and use and public realm objectives. And you could build into that, you know, bonus points for doing something really well.
And Dan, I think we can actually locate those places in the plan where we want to give those benefits. You know, it's going to be where that cinema location is super critical to the plan, or where we want a, you know, a key retail corner, and we can define the maximum height, the maximum and the minimum maximum height, right? So it may be a range from 6 stories to 8 stories, you know, in that specific building block, and detail how the density bonus, you know, could work in that place.
That's great. But again, Jim, I think to David's point, it's got to be something fantastic. So, you know, if we put something in there, if we all agree to a 6-story building in an area and we have some flexibility to go to 8, and somebody comes in with a performing arts or a theater or with some kind of anchor that's going to drive those people we see on the street and all the drawings. It's going to create that kind of traffic. That's I'm
Yep.
interested in that.
Yep.
So, okay, great. Thank you guys. And I'm going to lower my hand, Adam.
Thank you. You're doing great. 19 meetings in. Atisha?
Hey, just was unmuting. Thanks, Leslie, for letting me in twice. I've dropped off. We lost internet, so I jumped onto my cell and then back. So thanks a lot.
Okay. Like, wait, she's here.
Yeah. I think I really agree with Matthew, as I'm following a lot of like state laws, legislation change, and mostly being more on the development side now. It will be important for us as tools, to of course depend upon the regulatory process we have, but also see how we can just make this an attractive market to get at what we want. So other things that we can do to actually generate the market forces. So not just completely depend upon regulations. And of course, BID is something I've been and arts, as we discussed, what can it just make it be for people to come here and businesses to come here. So I'm hoping that when we get into the placemaking discussion, we are having some discussion on the tools, not just the physical form of placemaking. So that's just kind of an open comment to whole DCTF and our consultants. Thank you.
Thank you, Atisha. I don't see anyone else's hands. I do remember Matt actually sparked my memory. So my last question is, does this plan take into account any bonuses or potential impact fees specific to the 10 block area that we kind of discussed earlier, or would that come later in the discussion?
That will come later in the discussion.
Got it. Okay.
This is just that base framework.
Perfect. Just want to make
We'll
sure.
pile on all the details after. But yes.
All right. No worries. Just want to make sure. So
Yeah, good point.
I don't see anyone else's hand. Anybody else before we move to public comment? Like to add anything? Questions, comments? No? Okay. We'll move to public comment for item number 1. I do want to make a note that it looks like we've missed some chats before in some of the earlier meetings. Not this meeting, so I'm going to pay attention to the chats. I don't see any now, but if there's anyone from the public that would prefer to put any questions or comments in the chat, I will look at it before we close public comment. So going to the hands first, I saw Suds, Jane hand up first. So go ahead, Suds.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, very
Yep.
good. I don't know how many of you watched the council meeting on Tuesday, which I consider to be sort of a train wreck. The El Camino Real specific area plan had an advisory committee consisting of affordable housing groups and building industry groups. It was 4 years in the making. And I know you guys are talking about extra height on Benton, and Dan's talking about 6 to 8 story buildings. But what happened was there was no shading study done. And then sort of at the last minute, people realized that for December 21st, some people weren't going to get any sun. And so basically the council shot it down, sent them back to the drawing board, and reduced the heights of everything. There were lots of public outreach meetings. There were council study sessions before that. And so I know everyone's put in a lot of effort here, and I'm just cautioning you to avoid another train wreck. So, and I think it's very key to get economic analyses and make sure that whatever you're going to do is feasible economically, and that there's plenty of outreach to the residents. Thank you.
Well, were the shading studies in question intended, or that weren't done, or maybe now will be, intended to assess the extent to which new development would shade existing homes, or that new development would shade other new development?
New
de-
development would shade
Yes.
single-family homes
Thank you.
on the
Existing.
north side.
We,
And
we
so
did
the
That's
do
what I
city,
this
assumed-
is
that's
Andrew
what I thought.
Crabtree again. We did do a shade study, Leslie's familiar with it too, that basically found that at the winter solstice, there would be some shading of the adjacent single-family homes, yards as a result of the new development allowed in the plan.
Okay. And on the basis of that, maybe some changes are being considered to the plan.
Yeah, I think there were bigger issues really about number of units and overall density and concerns along like why we were planning for as much development as we were as well. I think that we could have just addressed the shadow shade issue through a different sort of step back requirement, but it kind of went from there into a bigger discussion just about the amount of development.
Thank you.
No form-based code, David.
Well,
No.
Yeah.
And there's some challenges with the lots along El Camino.
well, sure. Yeah, corridors are tough. They back up to houses.
So no, thanks, Suds, for bringing that up. Is that something in the plan, like the form-based code is going to address then to make sure that, again, this is the preliminary structural, the structure of the precise plan, but the form-based code would address and advise on specific heights for shading existing single family, especially on like the north side of Benton?
Yes,
Probably a little
absolutely. We're
Perfect.
going to, in the presentation, we're going to show in a few minutes, there's an illustration that I think we first showed you like a year ago that addresses that. Yes.
I recall that. I remember you guys did that.
That's
Yeah,
great.
that's it. Yeah, I mean, we thought of that the first time I walked out onto Benton Street.
Perfect.
And
also
I'm not
we-
saying we have it all figured out, but yes, we're aware of that issue and we're committed to resolving it.
Is that water
appropriately.
okay?
Great.
We have done like a rough shade analysis of the urban form that we have created for the downtown. So we'd shared that previously, I think a few DCTFs ago. So we did do like a rough analysis to make sure that the neighborhood is not getting impacted too
Yeah,
much.
and that's a tool we can continue to use as this plan evolves towards the final version. So yeah,
And
we can.
if we need to sculpt some block, we can do that. And that's another advantage of the form-based code is you can have you can just address it head on. In some cases, we have a height overlay plan that just shows exactly how tall buildings can be in what part of which block.
Great. Suds, did you have anything else? I still see your hand up. Just want to make sure. Okay, Jonathan Evans.
Hello. So I had some questions, some of which were maybe partially answered, but I had some questions about the flexibility within the plan. For example, I noticed like Block J shows a very large multi-story development, but that's also a place that may be acceptable to have townhomes. And I guess are there ways to put like choices or options for developers so they could pick like, here's one form versus here's another form and either of these okay? We should make sure we capture that if possible. Yep.
Absolutely, yes, for sure. Yes, there will be a lot of flexibility of that sort as to the types of dwellings and as to the scale and size of the buildings within parameters.
But I think within Block J, it's really, really critical. I mean, the townhomes are being shown along Benton and the taller buildings are being shown in the block interior. And that's a distinction that we're going to want to really maintain.
I thought J was the one that's at the corner of, Benton and Monroe. Yeah.
You want to pull that one up, Deeksha?
Maybe I just read the wrong block.
No, I think you must be right.
Oh,
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it would be scaled down to the neighborhoods, to the top there.
Yeah, because there's single family homes back there right now. Okay.
Yes, and we can address not only height, but also massing and scale, so that even if it's 2 or 3 stories tall, it's not one long, box that's the same height.
Yeah, because I like, for example, some of the other blocks show like kind of shorter massing, and if somebody wanted to build something, because I remember townhomes penciled out in the last, when we talked about finances before, that's a block where like, since it does scale of the neighborhood, if someone built townhomes that may or may not be that might be more acceptable to the community, or also a fine option versus, we understand that there's maybe more people concentrate more of the density in the central parts, like, F, E, D, and C. Related, one other question is, we talked about having commercial uses, and do commercial uses indicate like leasing offices or other amenities for the apartments? Because I've seen many developments seem to consider their leasing office toward their commercial use, and then they put the leasing office on the corner, which is like the most valuable retail space for like a restaurant or pretty much any business. And are there things that we can take within the form-based code or this plan to discourage, those types of gaming the system, or just basically underutilizing or misusing the retail that you're requiring?
Absolutely. For instance, very often, in addition, on top, the regulating plan would identify the basic use and scale and size parameters for the buildings, but we can also put frontage. We can highlight certain frontages. So we could say that within 150 feet of the corner of this and that, you have to have a commercial use in it. And the list of allowed uses might not include apartment building leasing offices. You can get very surgical. I mean, we don't want to overcomplicate it, but if there's certain things you want to avoid, the avoidance can just be coded right in.
Okay, thank you.
We don't want to go crazy with that and try to micromanage the economy, but if there's specific things you don't want, they can just not be allowed.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern I've seen from other developments is just the preponderance of leasing offices or the front doors for the apartment complex kind of taking up those valuable areas, and you see that over and over again. So I totally agree, though. You don't want to specify it too much.
On a lot of sites that are zoned for mixed use, apartment builders want to see if they can just do an apartment building and call it a mixed use thing.
Yep. Thank you.
We know that game.
Thank you, Jonathan. Mary Grizzle. Welcome, Mary.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Are there any safeguards, or can there be safeguards to prevent the same mistakes made at the Silicon Sage building for their retail? There were a lot of mistakes made. There was not plumbed for restaurants. It was improperly plumbed and stuff. Are there safeguards, or can there be safeguards to prevent that from happening in, say, retail downtown?
Yes.
I mean, another common mistake is that the second floor is just too low, so you can't have tall enough ceilings on the ground floor for a nice restaurant or a shop. We just code that right in and require a minimum floor and or ceiling height. Plumbing is that can be specified, I'm sure. We don't normally do that, but that is certainly something that could be specified.
Yeah. Ventilation. So
Yeah,
that could be.
You can specify, for instance, ventilation shaft, air shafts, so that somebody can in fact get the
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Exhaust out to the roof.
Thank you, Mary. I see Jonathan Evans' hand again. Jonathan, you want to make another quick comment? Or nope. I was going to ask if he just accidentally left it up too. All right. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on this item? I'm going to check chat. I don't see any additional comments. Can someone verify that? Because I don't know if I'm screwing this up. I'm looking. I don't see anything though.
I don't see any.
Okay, perfect. All right, can we make a motion to close public comment for item number 1?
So
I
moved.
make the motion.
All right.
I second.
All right, all in favor of closing public comment, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, the ayes carry. Public comment for item number 1 is closed. Are there any additional comments, questions from the DCTF members that kind of arose from any of the public comments? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Dish. I can see your real hand.
So I think some of the good questions were about, conforming and non-conforming uses and how do we define the horizon of these conforming and non-conforming uses. And maybe that's just kind of a deeper discussion we should consider as an agenda item. I have looked at the current conforming uses and had written a long email, which I find are very constraining right now to the current downtown zoning in our zoning code. So anytime I would just request that to be a full agenda item to discuss how and what we define as conforming and non-conforming uses in this downtown.
That would be a very natural part of a discussion of the code in an early draft form, because that in turn would inform, some of the physical standards.
Yep, and I feel like in terms of like placemaking programming also it can come in, because right now I see like if anyone reads it's pretty restricting our current uses that can be allowed in downtown within the zoning code. So yeah.
Chair Anna has her hand up.
Anna, go ahead. Sorry, I had problems unmuting. Appreciate it, Leslie. Thank you. Anna?
Just a quick clarifying question for everyone, WRT as well. I recently went to Half Moon Bay and I noticed a lot of wonderful old homes that had been repurposed. They're on the fringes of the downtown and now they're like a brewery and they're restaurants and they're really cool looking actually. There's a lot of mishmash of older homes on Homestead that are dentists and chiropractors and office uses. And then on Benton, there's like childcare and other mishmash of uses, including a lawyer's office, and then homes in between. I almost see the growth of the downtown kind of spreading all the way across Benton, all the way across Homestead, with more interesting dining, because that doesn't exist there. Does this plan allow for that kind of growth for commercial? I mean, I'm not clear if it's only adjacent, like for example, Benton Street. I know half of it will be part of our plan, but what about across the street where there's a mishmash of other uses? Some commercial, some not. Is that okay to be part of the plan, or is that a zoning question? I mean, how do we encourage growth?
That is not part of the current plan, but that could be addressed as part of a zoning change, in another effort.
It would be very unusual to have a plan for a downtown that didn't address both sides of any streets. Having different zoning on one side of a street in a context like this is just weird.
Thank you.
So how is that addressed?
For zoning, is that the answer?
Well, I mean, the form-based code could address both sides of the streets if you wanted it to. That would be how we would normally do it.
Yeah, we'll have to take a look at that. I don't know what those general plan land use designations are and how that may affect the zoning, but
well, sure.
Definitely something we can look at.
Okay. Thank you, Anna.
One comment on that is Sunnyvale did the same thing. I think it was Sunnyvale where, they got their downtown in a 10 square block or whatever it is, 8 square block, and restaurants have opened up outside of that 8 square block. So.
Sure. That's how cities work.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think my suggestion would be to somehow have an overlay where any adjoining parcels to any big precise plan or any big, planning process we do, the adjoining parcels might have right to choose to be, by some simpler way to adapt to the land use in that planning area. I mean, on El Camino Real, we had this discussion with you separately offline of like how, single family homes could leverage the density, So if there is a way that adjoining parcels just can easily adapt to the precise plan or specific plan land uses to make more money because they are impacted, like they're impacted positively or negatively, why not be positively impacted? And we see this on, I'm forgetting, I think not Murphy, Middlefield, like in the Sunnyvale, like the houses that chose not to be part of the Sunnyvale precise plan, they are so depleted and they're like so behind the freeway ramps. Like they fought not to be part of the precise plan. And now like 10 years, 20 years later, they're paying the price of that. I'm forgetting the name of the street, but it's kind of the main street over the Caltrain. But that's something we should allow more flexibly than having small parcels owner having to go through a full rezoning process.
Anna, do you still have your hand up, or is it just a? All right. I don't see any additional hands from the DCTF members. Is there a motion on the floor? Now everyone's quiet.
They changed the language, so I don't know what to call it. That I would move to accept the land use plan as presented. Do we need
Framework plan.
framework plan?
The preferred framework
Jen.
plan.
Okay. Is that good, Leslie? That's good enough motion?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second on that motion or discussion?
Second.
Okay. We'll vote on the motion unless there's discussion, which is all in favor of accepting the framework for the precise plan. Say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. And the motion carried, so the framework is accepted. Thank you, WRT.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Good work, everyone.
3
Yes.
years later. All right.
That was easy.
We're making progress.
Slow and steady, slow and steady.
It wins the race. All right, so we'll move on to item number 2, which is a placemaking workshop activity for the DCTF members facilitated by the Downtown Precise Plan consultant, WRT. This will be exciting.
Great. Shall we proceed? So I guess maybe just a little reality check. We're at 7:10 here. We had thought about 45 minutes or so to maybe up to an hour of content, and then wanted to leave about that much space for discussion also. But that would take us, all the way to 9 o'clock. I don't know how much flexibility everybody has. So I just wanted to check in about that.
We're definitely trying to get these meetings wrapped up within a 3-hour period. So let's see. I think that should work, or we can try to beat it.
Okay. So we'll try to clip through as concisely as we can. So let me see. Just back up, actually, Atisha, to the agenda. I just wanted to make sure that we framed all this. So we talked about the framework plan. And as I said, we want to go through our placemaking discussion or presentation of our placemaking ideas, and then leave plenty of room for discussion. And then from there, go to next steps. So we'll try to wrap that all up. We'll shoot for 9 o'clock. Cool. So let's go ahead and dive into placemaking. So next slide. So I think our team has been working very hard on the placemaking strategies, and this is sort of a first blush of what are those places that bring this down, or those elements that bring this downtown to life. What are the different tools that we can use to do that, and how do we use them all in combination with each other? So I think from all of you, we want your reaction. Are these the right set of tools? Are they being used in the right combination? What are we missing? Does this feel like Santa Clara? Does this feel like the right character? So I think we're just going to run through what we've been working on, and then we'd really like to engage you in discussion. So the first piece of this is, what's the foundation for placemaking? And there's so much great history and heritage here in Santa Clara, from the ecological heritage and agricultural history of the valley, the Ohlone history, the Native American history of the valley as well, and the surrounding ranges, and then the mission history that established itself, right here in downtown, and then the American settlement and the town that grew up from that, and eventually evolved into the main street that lasted up into the 60s before it was taken down for urban renewal. And then finally the era we're in, which is the Silicon Valley era. So how do we draw on all of these themes to honor this history and express it in this downtown to make a unique place? We're not trying to make a generic downtown. We're trying to make Santa Clara's downtown that's a reflection of this unique story. So I just wanted to put that down as a foundation for everything. And then we've broken placemaking down into these 6 components. So streets, public space, retail, culture, and ground floor, building form and massing, programming, and then art interpretation. And we put wayfinding in there, even though we haven't done a lot of work on wayfinding. We wanted to include that and register it in this last category. So we're really going to run through each of these 6 and talk about the different ways that these elements can contribute to placemaking. And the idea, if you go to the next slide, is that we want all of those layers to culminate in a place that is vibrant, active. It's the place that this community wants to go, to hang out, to meet their neighbors, to go to events, to dine in restaurants and in the plaza. And so we want to talk about not only what these layers are individually, but how do they all come together to create this unique place. So this is a typical block. You can see we've illustrated the block of Franklin Street between Washington and Main Street, looking south towards the library. And this is showing this different combination of elements. So those retail spaces that we were looking at in the essential uses diagram are shown here on the corners. Those would be critical places for retail, and they might have outdoor dining that spills out into the plaza, out into the sidewalk. There are different uses of the curb lane. Sometimes it's used for parking, sometimes it's used for bike share, sometimes it's used for parklets as an extension of the outdoor dining. Sometimes it can be used for shuttle stops, sometimes rain gardens. So all of those things are going on along the street frontage. And this is one of the little plazas in the area we're calling the Grove, which is at the intersection of Franklin and Main Street. And what's happening in that plaza? The Grove, the idea behind the Grove as an overall construct is that there's lots of shade. It's a really comfortable, cool place to hang out. But also, how's the plaza programmed? Are there little events that are programmed into the plaza, either festivals or music events? Are there food trucks and other micro businesses that can come in there, at certain times? So just thinking about the plazas as a place where these additional activities can come into play. So this is just, one block and one view of how these different placemaking elements have come together. But what we want to do next is to kind of walk through each of the elements, dissect them a little bit, talk about what they could be. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Atisha, or sorry, not Atisha, to Diksha. I'm so used to Atisha being on our team.
Yes. So why don't we go through each of the elements, look at them in greater detail, and understand their nuances. It'll be exciting. So the first one we talk about is streets. So with streets, our intention definitely is on the larger city scale that they should get integrated and the city should feel whole in terms of its fabric. So we do have the missing streets and they will get connected to each other ideally through this plan. So that's about the regional integration. And then we did want to create a complete grid which has a variety of streets and also changing hierarchy, the different user experiences as well. And most importantly, there'll be like a flexible network of alleys that you see here in orange. Now, these are not like specified in terms of that's the exact location, but on the block, you need to have them more like in that category. So these will be 26 feet and that'll really help like having porosity through the blocks. And then in terms of streets, it's very important that we talk about all the users of the streets and all the different modes. So not talking just about the car, but what other forms of usage can happen. So we've marked all the bus stops here, but then more importantly, adding the layer of bike lanes. So Benton and Homestead have bike lanes, and so does Monroe. And then Washington, which was a missing piece in the bike master plan. So connecting that through, because Washington Street didn't exist till now. So we want to do that in this plan. And then also Franklin will be a shared street. So bikes can also enjoy being down on that street. We've also talked about the concept of having a shuttle on Franklin. And these don't need to be like big full-fledged buses, but more of like smaller shuttle buses that could fly through here so that again, Franklin is a shared space for different kinds of users. We do have like the parking lot, so a nod to car access in the region. And micromobility has become really active these days. So having stations that make sense for scooter share, bicycle share in the region. So around the existing intersections of our bicycle network, we would want to have some of these stops and shared stations, which could enhance user experience and encourage more different ways of coming into downtown.
And I think just a note on the bike share, the scooter share, and the shuttle. I think a lot of that is about connecting to the train station. You know, this is outside the quarter-mile comfortable walking distance, and so I think it's going to be important for us to enhance that connection to the transit station, so that's really easy and seamless for all users.
Streets also, in terms of except for transportation, can also function for other uses. So allowing streets to have green infrastructure, which helps our environment, the ecology of the area, helping us with heat island effect. So locating rain gardens like this in our sidewalks, so expanded curbs and mid-block crossings, which will have a lot of this ecology which will come into place, and then adding a layer of street trees on that. So on a super hot day like it is today in Santa Clara, having like a shaded tree lane would be really, really helpful and would help with the heat island effect in the downtown as well. So we did want to add those in our placemaking as well, because they will play also an important role in defining the character of the street. So like a well tree-lined street makes it a more inviting space. You feel like walking down, the canopy forms like a room in itself almost. And we look through that as we see some of the sections of our streets. So let's go through those really quickly. This will be Lafayette. And if you look closely on this one, we have maintained the existing curve on Lafayette, and that's more to do because there will need to be like a detailed study if we need to change that section, and that's like the director has been given. But also looking at this section on the left side, how the downtown can start interacting with Lafayette. It can start opening up and making it more active in terms of having outdoor seating, and then also like getting recessed further so that there's more pedestrian zone and inviting people in that way. But we also obviously do have like an alternative option. This would obviously need to be studied with our engineers on whether the reductions can go through. But if we reduce the space, we can have space more on even the right side. If and when the university develops, there can be more pedestrian ground. And there is just a balance of easy crossings and a more welcoming street, which will add to the downtown, so that it's not like a huge island roadway before you get to the downtown, especially for like student crossings and coming from Franklin Street to the transit center. That would be really helpful. But this is something that we need further study. Franklin Street and similarly Homestead are the multimodal streets which will have dedicated cycle lanes. And then we do have like the 2 traffic lanes with a turn lane in the middle. And then looking at how the step down is interfacing with the existing neighborhood already. And we also see that if it's like a residential frontage, then there is some step back. It's not right at the sidewalk. So it's creating a more comfortable environment for the pedestrians and also giving some privacy to the homes in general. Franklin, and we've seen this before, would be a really active street with a lot more sidewalk space than all of the other streets, and that would be its defining character. And so the center, like the traffic lane, is more of like a shared street concept. So all the users would be on that street. There's like one lane in each direction, but then the rest of the space, especially like the strip right next to the sidewalk, is a really flexible one, which can in parts be parking, but then in parts become parklets. It can become the shared bike facilities and be really flexible that way to give a very user experience as we walk through. There's also the interesting use of where we suddenly start having arcades and recessed storefronts. So using elements like that also to create more interest for pedestrians while they're crossing through the street and making them go further down Franklin. And then we address the other streets that we have, which is Madison, Washington, and Jackson in a more typical street manner. And David, do you want to jump in here to talk about them really quickly? You're on mute, David.
It'll work better if I'm not muted. Okay. Thank you, Diksha. Yes, so we were thinking of the north-south streets as probably typologically very similar to one another, but systematically varied based on which street and which ground floor use was present in any particular stretch. So Washington, for instance, would be just a normal neighborhood street with with travel lanes each direction and parking at the curb. Then a 6-foot wide planting and landscaping strip, which could incorporate some stormwater management. Oh wait, where are we? Oh, there we go. Okay. And a 6-foot sidewalk, which is comfortable for 2 people to pass easily without being so wide that it feels like a commercial environment. And then approximately 10 feet, maybe plus or minus a couple feet, for stoops or small yards, or even a little raised yard, or even a semi-private raised patio that might not have a direct entrance if the buildings didn't have direct access to each ground floor unit. But in any case, as Diksha mentioned, Benton, you know, a privacy buffer, which is the purpose of a residential frontage in a downtown setting. So pretty simple. Then, as that same street came to the corner, we would suggest that the dimensions not change. We would suggest that there still be a 10-foot setback requirement to a ground floor commercial use, which would then generate a 16-foot wide sidewalk, which would support some outdoor dining and just a strong, active, high pedestrian traffic commercial environment at the corner, without necessarily any disruption of the street wall. And by the way, these buildings are not the most exciting buildings in the world. We just put them in here today to sort of define the space of the street. We're not advocating, you know, everything be the same color. So the simplicity of the 6-foot parkway or planting strip. By the way, if it's 6 feet and then where it's in the residential context, you would have perhaps more planting. Yeah. You could be just like this, or you could even have larger areas of planting with smaller areas to just let arriving motorists get out of their car. But it would be a residential scale, and then go to the next one, please. And then you just get the broad sidewalk, and you would have, if these are 6 feet wide, you'd have enough room to even have a row of tables or chairs in the planting strip there, and have a walk down the center, which would give you you would suddenly find yourself in a very active environment at the end of the street where you live. Next, please. Then Main, because it's a very important street connecting to the park. We, on the North Main, you know, north of the Central Grove, we were suggesting that it be very similar to the streets we just looked at, but that it would, thank you, but that it would have an 8-foot wide sidewalk, because we would hope that we would expect it might have higher levels of pedestrian traffic with folks who live in the new housing, and folks that live in the neighborhood to the north on the other side of Benton, choosing this as the preferred way to get to the park and to get into the central square, the Grove. And in order to implement the greenest street of all idea, since it's terminating in the Plaza Park, the planting strips could be a lot more landscape and just enough pavement so you can get out of your car without wading through bushes. And then let's go to the next one, please. Then South Main, then the piece of Main Street between Homestead and Franklin could be a much broader, grander thing. And so we're suggesting that the planting strip here might be expanded from 6 feet to 8 feet to really make a much grander, you know, amount of landscape, separating the sidewalk from the street, and also providing a bit wider space potentially to have a little more, you know, bigger table and chairs at the curb if this space was occupied by a dining, you know, food and beverage business. And then we're suggesting that the sidewalk itself be the 8 feet of north. Well, this is pretty much the Main Street version of the Washington and the other ones, where you just have the wider planting strip between the Grove and the park. You'd have the 8-foot sidewalk, and then the 12-foot setback would be just a widened sidewalk. So you'd get a 20-foot sidewalk, which would be a grand thing. And it could have a second row of smaller trees closer to the building to green it even further and provide shade for diners and pedestrians. We're suggesting here that you might prioritize, you know, RBT, you know, real big trees. But between the Central Grove and toward the park, we just showed California sycamores, thinking, wouldn't that be cool? Anyway. And this is another variation of that, where you could have 2 rows of trees of sort of two rows of equal size. So the one option that we just came up with ourselves, just thinking about it today, was if you had really big trees closest to the street and then smaller ones behind, or you could just have a double row of trees that are sort of both medium sized. Either one could be glorious.
And just to add a note to this, this is our widest right of way. So this is this is 90 feet or thereabouts.
90 feet building to building.
And it's, you know, so it's wider than Franklin, it's wider than any of the other ones, and
Yes.
that's very deliberate. What we're saying here is this is sort of the grand sort of Beaux-Arts access to the park. And it's this really great green promenade. It's a strolling place, it's shady, it's got this signature double row of trees, and it just says park, you know, it's part of that sort of green spine.
Right.
And so it's, you know, the idea was to really make this as a signature street, because it's, you know, it's on this important cross axis.
And what would be fantastic is if at some point you could do something grander with Main Street on the other side of Homestead, and perhaps something grander with the Plaza Park.
Can I just add something really quick in regards to the trees? I know we've spoken with the fire department many times over trees and access to buildings. And so just being cognizant of that as well. I know we spoke of it before, but you know, realistically, what you're showing now may be something more palatable to the fire department to provide them access for their ladder trucks over the trees. So just keeping that in mind.
Okay.
Even though those really big trees are beautiful.
They're not comfortable going between them. They want to get over them.
I think they will go between them if they're spaced far enough apart as well. So just, yes, I've seen that. So something to keep in mind of, you know, tree placement and tree type is going to be important. So yeah.
Yeah, good point, Leslie. And I think, you know, we're going to be ready pretty soon to sit down with those guys to talk not only about access and trees, but also the different widths of these streets, the different street types and alleys and so forth. So good point. And that's something we'll definitely follow up with you on to maybe arrange a check-in with them.
Yeah,
That's incredible. That's incredibly important that we get that right.
Just kind of a quick comment on it, and this is, you know, I have to because I love the alleys in this plan. And the whole idea of providing alleys was that we could have successful streetscape because alleys can become these service corridors for fire escapes and other things. So making sure that that piece is pretty embedded. Otherwise, we will have very limited trees. So making sure the definition of alleys is made stronger and stronger as we move forward with this plan, so you can have good streetscapes.
Yeah,
and
so
our current conception of the alley is that it's simple and functional as an alley. We're not seeing it as something where you'll have trees and street light and people sitting out there at dining tables. I mean, because the good news about, well, the fact is that if you want fronts that are just fantastic, you got to have backs. You know, the nature of the suburbs is that every building has either 4 backs or 4 fronts, depending on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. And the way that you make the kinds of fronts that we're showing on Franklin is something else is the back. But having said that, what we're hoping to illustrate here is that by paving and simple landscaping and good architecture, you can make this a space that is very reasonable and valuable to have apartments facing into, rather than a dismal thing that, you know, nobody's going to want to rent this because they got to look at this. So there's ways to make unlined parking structures a perfectly nice thing to be looking at. And that's just, you know, that's mostly just good architecture. But we would recommend not thinking of them so much as muses or something where, you know, I mean, Pasadena has some beautiful alleys full of restaurants, but those are because they're not used as alleys anymore. They're just nothing else except for a place for restaurants, and you can't drive through there to park your car.
David,
Yeah.
I was just in downtown Pasadena today, driving through, and yeah, we walked down some of those alleys. It was pretty interesting.
Well, they used to be alleys, but they're not how you get, so, and it may be that as this moves forward, it may be that there's certain blocks that can have something like this that just in fact doesn't need to provide much access for cars. So there may be a bunch of shades of gray on these things.
Yeah, so just to like keep us scrolling.
Oh, and yes, Lodo has some amazing alleys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great example.
So specifically with the alleys, we are keeping them 26 feet because that would be helpful with fire access, and we will definitely talk a little more with the fire.
Yep. And it may be that they wouldn't let these balconies be here because that it hurt their ladder. We don't know.
Okay, so
When buildings get tall, they get into the angle of attack thing with the ladder. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
Okay, so moving. Anna, do you have a question?
Yes, just from a historical point of view, I do love a California sycamore, but prior to any of us arriving in California, it was all about the Ohlonies, and one of their key staple foods was the acorns from the oak trees. And I thought it might be kind of cool to incorporate what their main sustenance was in living in that area of the downtown. It's sort of like an homage to what the Ohlonies were all about, since it's also going to be a big dining area. I would love to see an Ohlone restaurant of some kind, some Native American representation, and it could start with the trees, you know, just an inspiration point.
We'd have to think carefully. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. There'll be some tactics and strategy there, because oaks grow, you know, like way slower than sycamores. So we'll just have to think about where you're willing to wait 20 years to have a big one.
Or a developer willing to provide that community benefit to transplant a beautiful oak tree into a particular spot.
I like the way you're thinking, Leslie. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, and we can get really nice containerized oak trees. We just put a whole street of valley oaks down in Mountain View, and they were installed in 48-inch boxes, and they're probably almost 25, 30 feet tall to begin with, and they've already started to take root, and so they definitely have a presence, and you can space them a little closer together. So yeah, good comment.
Thank
Anna.
you.
All right, so let's talk about our second element, which is public spaces. What we did want to do with the downtown was to create distinct public spaces and also give a variety in terms of the usage there, and also a variety in terms of size. So some are more intimate, some are slightly larger. The first one that we're looking at is Lafayette Gateway. So this one, since it's coming first, and it has like a few additional elements in terms of like the food hall, the theater marquee, and it'll form like a plaza sort of space where all of these activities can sort of spill over. That's the intent with the Lafayette Gateway, which is a gateway to downtown. The second different sort of space that we're looking at is Franklin Square. So paying homage to an existing public space that exists in downtown. It frames the post office, so we do want to keep the post office there, and then also like the farmers market addition, so that kind of activity will flow into Franklin Street in that region, and then maintaining some of the existing mature trees there and creating a quiet plaza sort of area where people can come and enjoy that region. Is like the intent with Franklin Square. And this gets contrasted with the Central Grove, which is the focal point of Franklin and Main Street, and which is where all the lovely boulevard that we just saw is leading towards. And this is envisioned as like a grove in the heart of an urban place. And this will also be built incrementally. So it's like a great design for that increment to come in really seamlessly. And you have like this nice space where you can like hang out, feel like in the middle of nature while you're still in the downtown. And then just looking at Central Grove and how it can be developed over time. So if we're in the near term and we have the first public space, which is Lafayette Gateway, and the existing Franklin Square, and we have the Park Central apartments, which have a lot of greenery around them. It looks like a forest almost already. So playing off of that in the midterm, when these two blocks get developed potentially, we start seeing the influence of the Central Grove happening and the connections towards the existing park. And then once it gets redeveloped, the formalized Central Grove comes into place. So there's this easy transition that will happen over time to build up this part of the public space in the downtown. And then talking a little more about what the ground floor looks like and the detail and the culture of the space. So Andrew, do you want to take over?
David's going to share his screen now.
Okay.
Or I can get us rolling.
Like David might have stepped away for a second.
Yeah. You back? Oh, cool. David, are you ready to?
Did I miss my cue?
We're ready for you now.
We're ready for you.
I apologize. I just had to get another little sip of water. Excuse me. Okay. Okay, so we are going to talk about what we see as the top priorities for placemaking from the perspective of how buildings are made, which would then be informing the primary topics and concepts that would be part of the implementing code. So obviously, the main thing that makes a downtown different from everywhere else is the ground floor activity and the role of buildings, particularly their ground floors, is to activate the public realm and provide a place that draws people at all times of the day and the evening, often and for a longer and longer periods of time, because they just lose track of time because it's so cool to be there. Calibrating the frontage to the public realm, making essentially a seamless flow from indoor to outdoor, which is the great opportunity we have here in California, providing a high level of visibility for the businesses that are there and a high degree of basically draw you in by essentially, as you walk past the business, you sort of feel like you're already in there. And in many cases, the business can extend out into the public right of way, providing high levels of success. And actually the nature of the street and the slow speeds of driving are incredibly important, separate and apart from pedestrian visibility, because the slower the driving goes, the wider your angle of vision is. And you'll be as you drive, you'll be seeing into the stores in this kind of an environment. Not that driving is the main thing. And then wherever there's housing, there needs to be some sort of a privacy transition. This is a set of beautiful buildings in a development that some friends of ours master planned about 20 years ago up in just west of Portland, where in this case, they have stoops that go up to the main floor of a residence and then little stairs that go down into a light court. That certainly wouldn't be out of the question here. But the point is simply that there's a transition that gives the residents a sense of privacy and makes them comfortable enough that they don't keep their shades closed all the time, so that they're overlooking, providing, in Jane Jacobs' terminology, eyes on the street, so that people who walk through here, imagine this is Main between Homestead and the Grove, people who walk through there have the strong sense that folks in the residences would see if anything bad started to happen. And so basically the opposite of this, which is, you know, some poor resident who just, they open their door and boom, they're on the sidewalk and anybody walking by could just sort of knock on their window. So not that. The other type of frontage, in addition to the privacy buffered residence and the super transparent shop front, would be the common entry, the lobby, so that in large multi-story buildings that are being modeled here, what would very often be the case along, even, well, in some cases, even along Franklin, you would have shops, and then you would have a lobby entering the apartments upstairs or the offices upstairs, so that interposed with retail shops, you could have, and by the way, we discussed this about the theater idea, that the theater's frontage on Franklin Street would be a narrow thing, and that you would then go in and find the big theater in the back. Here, you would go into a lobby like this and find 100 apartments or, you know, 20 companies in the office building. And they could be as simple as this. Basically, they would be distinguished addresses for the whole building or a large portion of the building. Transparency of the ground floor is incredibly important. You do not want people putting tinting on the glass. You do not want people having shades drawn. You want, again, to just have people on the sidewalk feel like they're in the business and vice versa. You want to have the ground floors high enough that you have a sense of space, and if there's a restaurant that goes, you know, 60 feet deep, if you're in the back of the restaurant, you can like be seeing out to daylight rather than feeling like you're at the end of a tunnel. And it provides a great flexibility of use that businesses of different times can occupy these kinds of spaces over the years, over the decades, even over the centuries. There's flexible frontage. This is an example of one example of a retail ready possibility, where you would have an entry that might be calibrated to be suitable for either a shop or the ground floor of a residence, and that in the interim, before the market was ready for retail, you could have a semi-private space separating the resident from the sidewalk. You could have a gate that could be opened or closed. If this were an office or a business, you might still have this low fence, and you could have a table and chairs, and you could entertain your clients at coffee out in the front. But then at some point in the future, these openings could be simplified, turned into glass, and you could have just a full-on retail street. And there's variations in between over time. This has been successfully done in quite a few developments. There was a lot of this actually in Jack London Square area, south of the 880 in Oakland, in the last couple decades, that started out residential lofts and turned into retail. Here's this is a live work building that we built up in Hercules about 15 years ago. And they're zoned to allow the ground floor to be used as part of the residence, but a lot of businesses have broken out here. In this case, they've still kept these little walls. They could also pull them out and just have a wide sidewalk. Here's another one we've been developing more recently. You could actually have a recessed shop front or an arcade condition, which if the market was not ready to accept these as commercial spaces, you could simply put planters here and basically have like almost something that works like a porch. I'm ashamed to tell you, we've been internally calling this a porcade, but and then when the market was such that retail establishments would be successful in here, it can just turn right into shops and restaurants. And there's all different tricks for making indoor-outdoor environments. This is one of the most beautiful historic buildings in Los Angeles. It's in Koreatown. It's a historic market, and they have these accordion windows that just open up in the daytime. Actually, there's some not unlike these in Market Hall up in Rockridge. But there's just a lot of ways that, and we could mention these in design guidelines that would encourage people to pursue frontages that can be opened in fine weather and closed when you need it. Also, the widths of the sidewalks that Jim and his team have been designing are such that you can just let the dining activity spill right out onto the sidewalk in front of the business, and many of the sidewalks are wide enough that you could have some other tables here over at the curb, as were shown earlier. So that's the story of frontages, basically trying, except for the residential only, where you're trying to create enough sense of privacy that people are comfortable living there while overlooking the street for 18-hour comfort and safety of pedestrians. You want to have, you just want it to flow in and out. Then the buildings themselves need to, the buildings in a setting like this, they're the walls of the outdoor rooms. What the essence of a downtown is that the streets are the outdoor rooms, the living rooms, family rooms, and playrooms of your community. And the buildings need to stand up and be the walls of them. Now, this isn't the most ultimate example, but it's an interesting example of a newish building with, you know, fairly acrobatic architecture that's still performing the basic function of defining the space, enlivening the ground floor plane, and activating a piano nobile level above that overlooks the street to create a strong sense of this being a place that's lived in. These little yellow balconies are pretty cute too. So starting with the framework that WRT has defined, that your committee has defined, the plan of blocks and streets, you've got the outdoor rooms are defined by the blocks, and the blocks are defined by the buildings within them. So the building placement must be regulated to be at the front of the lot or very close to the front of the lot, and the massing of the buildings should be simple enough that it's defining the outdoor rooms rather than just goofing off. So we would suggest there be a build to band, basically you could build up to the property line on the front, or you could set it back a certain amount, but don't go crazy with popping them in and out. Enough depth to get some strong articulation and form, but not enough that there's a lot of holes in the street wall. And then except that, an exception to that would be that you could have paseos or even courts that would essentially be an intrusion of the public realm into the block. It would be essentially you're extending the public space inside the block in certain cases to provide special addresses for housing. It could even be like a dining court. It could be an outdoor lobby of a theater, like the one on University Avenue in Palo Alto that got converted to a work share. Historic theater got converted to a work. So anyway, you can have limited, but they can't be really wide, and we need to specify in the open space standards what sorts of spaces would be allowed to poke holes in your street wall. And then again, the essence of the downtown character is just got walls. Now here we've got some more modern buildings that are again sort of doing things differently, but what they all have in common is they have transparent ground floors, and then they have buildings that pretty much define the spaces of the outdoor rooms. And in general, and this, well, you know where this is, it's Santana Row. But in general, the traditional downtowns have shop fronts, and the windows of the buildings, of the floors above, generally stack. Not literally or rigidly, but generally they're creating a verticality, which is characteristic of traditional downtown buildings, that they're not emphasizing horizontal. Well, actually, we're working on the Claremont project we're working on. There's several architects working on buildings while we finish the code. All but one of them are organizing buildings in this way, and the other one feels compelled to do strong horizontal masses, which is just kind of disruptive and obnoxious, and we've asked them to cut it out. So then on the edges, of course, it's important. Oh, so here we're saying the building architecture, we wouldn't suggest that it's required to employ any historic styles, but basic facade composition should follow some of the timeless principles that I've just mentioned. And then when you come to the edges, it'll be important for neighborhood compatibility. And as Suds was mentioning, you know, shading, that the buildings scale down as they approach houses so that it doesn't feel like a battleship in a dinghy harbor. That's the technical term for it. Then we normally also in codes will regulate that horizontal facade increments, because if you're going to have 300-foot blocks, you don't want 300-foot long buildings or wide buildings. That isn't going to feel like a downtown. It's going to feel like a big old building landed in your little town. So what we find normally is that the widths of these facade increments in many, many California cities tends to be 20 or 25 feet. That's because when they originally platted the downtowns in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, especially the 80s when the railroads came, they platted them, they sold land in 25-foot slices. So people built buildings in 25-foot slices. And there tend to be 25s or 50s or 75s. So we often, and now this could be one project, and it doesn't have to be made to look like 3 historic buildings, but some techniques that make the buildings look less than enormously wide is usually important to give a downtown scale. There's different ways to do that at different scales. This is one of our favorite buildings. We used to have our office right across the street from it. This is the Biltmore Hotel on Pershing Square in LA. And so if you get taller buildings, you can also require that there be massing breaks between the pieces. That's something we can talk about as we think about how to convert the massing models that Jim's team has made into standards. And unified by a ground floor, a tall ground floor, but again, offering, you know, having buildings that are not just one giant box is we think quite important. Here's another way to do that. And then facade projections. So in this case, you can have, well, there's different ways to do this. You could have arcades where the pedestrian moves through the building. In this case, this is in Santa Barbara. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. And during COVID, they converted the arcade into dining and sort of closed it in, which isn't something that should be forbidden in general, we don't think, but it's another way to blur the indoor and outdoor with a piece of the building that comes out over the street. Here's some examples we've been working on in the desert for a downtown plan we did for Indio, where you've got deeply recessed. The facade is organized as a more pierced device to get you shade from the hot summer sun, but again, you could have arcades at the base that allow the pedestrian to engage the building more completely. And you can also do galleries that come out over the sidewalk. I've been spending more time than usual in Folsom, where my 5th grandchild was born last week, so we were up there. And you know, galleries of this type are another way to really let the building engage and sort of grab onto the public space, and can give you good options for dining within these. If your sidewalks are wide enough, you could turn the inside, you could turn this into dining and walk around the outside. Lots of possibilities. So flexibility of use, well, maybe this may not be the prototypical building we're going for, but this is an example a tall retail ground floor with office above and then housing up in the tower. And this is just to say what we were saying earlier, that if the building form is designed to create the spaces, then the uses can flex over the years. And having shared parking supply, not jammed into each building, but shared by the district, gives you the opportunity to flex uses in each building without having to worry about moving all the cars around to keep your parking balance even. And when you're designing the parking structures, it's possible to design them with a higher floor to floor so that as or if over the years you don't need so darn much parking, you could convert some of the floors to some other use, whether it's civic, whether it's office, whether it's housing. So parking structures that can be reused without being knocked down I mean, the most sustainable building is the building that's already there, as opposed to knocking it down and building another one. And then this is what Jim was mentioning earlier, I'll just mention it briefly, is that at certain key points, we could code height and or character and or maybe allowances for special signage or something to create an opportunity to generate a building which could be seen from a long way off. And actually, Jim's team prepared this lovely diagram. I'd love to animate it a little more, but as you see, the radial plan of Santa Clara surrounding the historic core here has streets shooting out into the landscape, as so many cities do. I mean, Oakland's got, Broadway and Telegraph, etc. So as you're coming down these streets, if there were a tall building at this corner, you'd see it a long way off. And likewise, certain other ones. So I think based on this diagram, we'll identify key sites that would have the opportunity to create an iconic, branding and identity essentially for the downtown. I mean, signage is great, but showing them the buildings is great too. I mean, you look at the way the Oakland Tribune building can be seen from Berkeley, looking down Telegraph. I mean, really. So that's it.
Great. David, if you could stop sharing the screen and take over.
And
Of course.
Atish, I think you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure, where am I? Whenever there is some time for comments, it seems too long to wait for the whole presentation and go back and make comments. So if we can break it up. Cool. I think I would just say a few things. I'm glad that there are some verandas. I really like that.
Some what?
I would suggest, I know all the outdoor uses.
Verandas, David.
The verandas, like the patios and covered patios.
I thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great. I mean, I come from Jaipur and that's what the city is famous for. So
there you go.
Love it. Other thing I would say, and this is kind of to the whole team and also the city, is like really think of outdoor uses which are non-dining. And what can be those outdoor uses? Like if I'm a sculptor artist, can I set up have my art be drawing outdoors, and how does that work with public space?
Like what? Certainly, yes.
Yeah. So especially in drawings also, as you're showing, let's show some non-dining uses and see how kiosk and a small vegetable vendor and some of there is this kind of small cultural texture, like small vendors can come in space. And I think the renderings speak a lot more to common public and they should have that texture. Other thing is especially on the North-South Street, it was really starting to see it as only cars shown. So the intent is there shadows or bikes can be on those streets.
Of course.
Fill the renderings more with bikes, because right now just to think that we're designing a downtown for cars, that's what they made. I got oh my God, so many cars. Where's the bike parking? Where's the bike infrastructure on these side streets? Especially we are so close to the station. So I don't know why every street should not accommodate bike in terms of speed.
Well, I think they do. They do.
Yeah, I'm just commenting on the.
They've either got bike lanes or they don't need them.
Yep. So other thing was some of the streets I just felt, and this is mostly like landscape architecture, making sure that the trees that we are recommending survive and thrive in narrow streets which don't get sunlight on one side. And if that's the case,
I think that I think the team's thinking about structural soil so that you would have much more than 36 square feet for a tree that's in a 6 foot wide planter. You'd have, 6 feet by 25 feet.
I'm just thinking more like sunlight, especially if they are on not outside next to the building. And they're just making sure like these things are part of the design, because we like showing trees in the rendering. At times they might not happen once we get to landscape architecture of the space. Other thing was, just as we're designing the streets, like trying to understand how these streets can transform into like at the times of festivities, Christmas and other festivals. So like making sure as we are writing the design guidelines, there is some, we don't have to design it, but some wording and some accommodation of like, oh, these streets can be, we should have street lights springing like across the buildings, or like having a little bit more, making sure like what are those places or how these streets can transform, and having some infrastructure to design. It doesn't have to be designed, but just making sure like in our language, we are accommodating how Christmas and other events might happen on these streets. So I think those were kind of my comments on physical space looking at, otherwise it's great, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good comments. Thanks, Atisha. Anna, did you have something before we push into the programming piece here?
Yes, I just wanted to echo what Atisha was saying about the lighting. It's been a very long-term problem for the downtown area. And we mostly heard this from the university students that we surveyed. They're not comfortable walking through our downtown. They stay on the more brightly lit streets, but not just using lighting as public safety, but also using it as an attraction, a reason to walk into the downtown. If a sense of festivity, like what Atisha was saying, Christmas time, we would love to make the downtown a centerpiece, and lighting seems to elevate everyone's mood. So lighting is very important on many levels. So not just public safety, but also the mindset, like this is a fun downtown, I want to go here. So is that addressed in the design? Like, do we have enough power sources or electrical outlets for instant events along Franklin Street?
I mean, sorry, go ahead, David.
Well, two things. I couldn't agree more. I mean, in small towns, and of which we know a lot, if you come into a downtown, if you come into a small town you've never been to before, and it's like 8 o'clock at night and you want to know where downtown is, you just look for the light and walk toward it. And the same could absolutely be the case here. And on your point and Atisha's, I mean, simple things like just making sure that there's convenient that there's power outlets in the bases of all the street lights. That that probably somebody at the city has a key to, and they can pop it open, and voila, you can plug in 110, 220, whatever, to run your booth or your grill or whatever.
That would be awesome.
And one of my pet peeves is you bring in all the food trucks and they all run their generators. And
thank you,
let's have outlets so they can all plug into those, in all the plazas permanently, so you don't have those darn things running and polluting both noise and air.
I would presume we're going to have car chargers here, so they could also have convenience outlets on them.
Great.
Thank you.
Good comments.
Dan, I see Dan's hand up.
Yeah, thank you. That just a great presentation. A couple comments, and I was trying to abridge this. But I'm speaking from my group, we concur that, borrowing from what's timeless, like the grid and the gathering places, and, I love the open spaces, outdoor dining, etc. And then the emphasis on Maine, is very commendable. Now, I wanted to clarify do you guys see less retail on Main or no retail on Main? It could have been the rendering itself.
The North Main, we were suggesting there might be not much. And on, well, I don't know, North Main going to Benton, we were thinking there was less. Main going to Homestead and the park, we were thinking there was more. What do you think?
Yeah, we could actually just flip, Diksha, if you could flip back to the essential uses, you can kind of see what we're, so definitely anchoring the corners. This is actually one of the places that we have one of the civic use options on one side. But that could also be retail frontage where the big pink block is.
Yeah, I think it should be retail liner. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want, 200 feet of the blank wall of the side of a theater there.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, and I think as you're going towards, the draw is going to be when people are, they want to kick back. There is small green spaces there, but you have the original park at the end of Main, which you guys, have pointed out several times, and that people will be walking there. So it might be a good draw for at least retail ready. I mean, that's my own opinion.
I would suggest, I would suggest we have a little bar of retail ready on the front of the pink thing.
Yep. Yep.
And then the alleys, I absolutely love it. It's just, I've been in all those cities, and that's what draws you. That's like your special space. Now, here's where I get my tires slashed, and I'm glad you're on this foil. And this, I'm not speaking for anybody in my group, or, this is just me, but everybody take a look at that park. The original first Santa Clara Park.
Yeah.
And there's a blob right in the center of it. And I know we love our library, but just picture that. And I'm not saying move it or what have you, but I don't know. What's your take on, a park like that with, it looks like a front lawn to the library to me.
Well, I mean, and when they planted the library, they planted the obligatory redwood trees that if you were in the 70s, you had to plant redwood trees. And so, it's a classic mistake.
So you mean the building or the redwood trees?
Yes.
See,
it's the same mistake when they made when they planted a little senior center and a fire station in the green up at Point Richmond.
Yeah.
They just totally misunderstood what town planning was about. And they said, well, we own it, let's put a building in it.
No, I texted that to somebody. It's just like, if the forefathers saw that thing, they'd say, you guys just missed the point. And again, I love the library. They just restored it. I know I'm going to get, my car is going to be not in the driveway when I leave here.
Well, you could at least turn the half of the park that's nearest to downtown back into a nice park. Right now, it's a piece of grass with like one redwood tree.
Exactly.
I'm actually going to talk about it.
We do have some thoughts about the library, and I actually, I wanted to just note also that we've got just a couple more quick sections to get through.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut off discussion, but I just wanted to make sure everybody realized we still have a little.
Yeah, no, what I want to do, Dan, can you wrap up? And then I see Atisha and I saw Anna's hand as well. Can we wait if we only have a couple more slides?
And I didn't mean to start a storm there. And I had a last comment was on the buildings, and we can talk about it after, but how you do create that downtown building without it looking SpongeBob square box like everywhere else. Yep.
Right.
But that's for later. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll have a lot of time to talk about that.
Too, yeah.
And Dan, I'm glad you brought up the library. We have some things to say about that in a second here.
Yes. Okay. So we spoke about more of like the hard elements in terms of street, public space, and buildings. So now more for like the softer touch in the downtown that can really help to activate it even further. Programming being like the first one we're talking about. So we know that there are some activities and events that happen around downtown already, with the farmers market, street dance, and the parade that has been restarted in recent years. There's a historic tour and things like that. So we want these activities to continue and we want to build on them even further. So just to add more elements, and this is not an exhaustive list at all. This can be a list that we can keep adding to with time, but these are just like some first set of ideas of like outdoor screenings, kids play areas, block parties, micro retail, which will activate the space a lot more, having music events and cultural celebrations. So really turning our plazas into those flexible spaces, which can incorporate all of these uses in them. So looking at what we have right now, these are like some of the elements that locations where we see some of these activities happen. And then we can really repurpose these spaces, especially like the 3 public plazas that we're creating into becoming these flexible, like outdoor event spaces for us. So right outside the theater, we can have the wall of this building could become like the spot for outdoor movie screening. So it just like flows out into this space here, and we have people sitting here and watching a movie during a nice summer day. One of the Central Grove spots can become like a kids play area so that families have more of a reason to continue to stay in downtown after they've had their lunch or something on a Sunday. Music events, which will draw people into the downtown. So that can be the university students specifically having art festivals, which can line the entire Franklin Street. So closing them off on a weekend and using that entire space as like stalls and outdoor exhibits. And cultural celebrations that we were talking about. So Christmas and what can happen on other events like Diwali or like the Chinese New Year, and like incorporating all of those celebrations into our downtown. So all of these plazas are spaces where we can talk further about things like these.
And with strategic street closures to expand.
Yes, yes. So Franklin Street is designed with that in mind, that it can keep being shut off from time to time, and also the lower half of Main, which will go to the library potentially. So those streets are designed to become flexible streets, which have the spilling out of all of these activities. And then near-term activation before all of these things get built, per se. So we have the Franklin Forward that we're already seeing. So using that right of way and already demarcating that on Franklin Street, but also activating the parking lot on special events. So you can have like a off the grid event in these parking lots around here. You can have some street painting and just like create this as a destination that people know about and already start coming to from now before we see the actual build in the near future. So that was about programming.
Good.
And then we can move to the other important element, which is art and interpretation. And that one, sorry, my internet's just giving me some suddenly. Okay, so we went through the little set of history that we had. So we do want to incorporate all of these, give a nod to all of this in our downtown. And we're just going to talk about some of the ways to do that.
Oh,
so when we're talking about cultural heritage, natural heritage, history, we can have like gardens which are talking about the native planting, like the example of the oak tree that we already heard about. So bringing that into our downtown space and the vegetation we choose there. We can also have installations and motifs, etc., that talk about some of these times. There's also this really interesting way of putting these on the pavements of our plazas and like really helping people understand and envision that while they're walking through our downtown. Another set of things when we're talking about looking at the previous history of downtown or the previous urban patterns. So how can we envision that? So just imagine you're like walking through a block and you see like the old, like a vision of the old downtown, like painted on one of the giant walls there. And then you like walk across the street and then you see the new one. So just like juxtaposing both of those, like the history and the reality together to create this interesting dynamic, and adding it even in like smaller elements. So it doesn't always have to be like a big touch. It can always be a smaller touch here and there as well. And then getting more of like contemporary culture and new perspectives. So you can have like revolving installations which talk about current affairs and things that people want to discuss from time to time. You can even have like and that really helps in like drawing people in. So if you have like a major installation space, people can be like, oh, like 5 months down the lane that has changed. Let's go see what is in downtown Santa Clara today. And that could be like a driver to get people coming back and also keep the place fresh. So that's just like looking through some of this. And we now like culminating like all of these elements together. Let's see what Santa Clara can become. Jim?
Yeah, so just to end here, we wanted to just take a look at each of the three main plaza spaces, if you want to switch to the next slide, and just show how all of these elements can really come together. So placemaking is about what's happening in the buildings, and it's about what's happening in the public spaces and how all those things are working together. So this is the Lafayette Gateway space, down at Franklin and Lafayette, looking at sort of cutting through where the theater might be with its marquee, a little food hall, or what we're calling a market pavilion in the plaza. And then lots of different activities happening in the plaza, spill out for a restaurant and cafe, perhaps a movie screening for outdoor movies in nice weather. And in the building just beyond the plaza, that's one of the potential locations indicated for the community center or performing arts space. And that could have an entrance both on Franklin and on the plaza. So this is just really showing how all of those things might come together to really create this place that people want to come and hang out. And then likewise in the next slide for the Franklin Square area. So this shows the preservation of the post office, really honoring that as a historic structure, stepping the buildings adjacent to it down to respect its scale. And then other new construction can have activating uses fronting on the plaza. This idea actually looks at both leaving the current fountain in place and circulating around it. So you might have a little S-curve in Franklin, or potentially moving and restoring the fountain to the side. So it would be, in the plaza across the street from the post office. So just a couple of different ways that you could do that. And then finally, in this view, this is the green promenade connecting from the Grove, the Central Grove Plaza, all the way to the library park. And this sort of puts an idea out there that, at some point, the library may be a candidate for replacement, and it would make a great civic use on this plaza. So this is something that the community might want to consider. It would be a great activating use on the Grove Plaza in this future phase. And Yeah, so this is, we've really talked about a lot of the ideas that are shown in this drawing. Again, just the strategic placement of activating uses on the ground floors facing the plazas, programmed activities within the plazas, lots of shade, and then this bold connection to the existing park. And I think that wraps things up. And I think Peter was going to just pose a couple of questions here. I think a lot of things we've already touched on, and really we'd just like to hear any additional thoughts and comments that everybody has.
Thank you for the presentation. So I'll go to the DCTF members first. If there's any hands, I saw one. Anna, go ahead. Saw yours first.
Well,
Sorry,
I
Butch.
definitely wanted to commend you on that mural with the Portuguese blue tiles and Cristiano Ronaldo kind of all over that. That was a very clever use of and reflective of some of the cultural roots in our very diverse little town that we have. I mean, I'm a history geek. So, but we have multiple, I mean, there's 52 languages spoken in our unified school district. That is how diverse our town is. So it would be great to have little bits and pieces reflected through art. So yeah, I commend you on that. That was very clever. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Anna. Butch Coin, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of comments I have. First and foremost, you guys did a terrific job. You really captured the elements that we brought to the table, especially since we are inexperienced. We have grand ideas, but you were able to take them, bring them together for a unified downtown. And I really appreciate the work you've been doing on it. I'm excited about this project. So for all of you and your team involved, thank you. I had a couple of questions. The first one is when we're looking at programming and capacity, especially on that Lafayette Street, do we have any indication of the number or volume of people we can put into that space? Reason I'm asking is with a university with 6,000-7,000 students, if for an example, the movie screen and the space can hold 50 people, we're going to have an issue. So I don't know how we look at capacity when we're looking at some of those outdoor spaces.
Yeah, we can definitely look at that, Butch.
A couple of things we heard from students is they said, even though there's plenty of room on the campus, getting away from campus where they can go study on a different lawn, throw a Frisbee around, mix and mingle with families and things like that. So the space availability for that. So just looking at some of the numbers there. The Central Grove, I think, is a wonderful idea. I also think that might be a great place for public art because you've set it up as a place to be reflective, to relax, for meditation, for calmness, for getting away from the hustle and bustle. And what better place for outdoor public art than a place like that? And not necessarily just one piece of public art. That could be a place where it's a gathering place to do that. The other piece, and this I know is totally outside your scope. We've been talking quite a bit about Main Street going into the park and the library and all those types of things. And if this is inappropriate, just let me know. The university has spent some time developing Franklin Street on our side. I'm going to be very open and honest with you. We had some grand plans for Franklin Street and the historic connections and whatnot. And due to financial considerations, the conservative nature of a Catholic university, what we're calling the historic Franklin Street Arts Paseo is quite dry, quite boring. We've had some thoughts on how we can incorporate from the Mission and the Alonis through the Morris Seed Company, through the Germantown breweries, tying into the arts, tying into downtown. It would be nice, and I don't know how to do this, how do we connect the two? What do we need to do at the university to connect the two? Because we just don't want the downtown to connect Main Street into the library. We don't want it just connecting down into Monroe Street. But part of our goal at the university is to become truly a part of the city of Santa Clara. And as I've mentioned before, we're oftentimes viewed as the little Vatican, a walled city within a city. And we've been given directions to say, we want to open those walls up. We want to make a part of it. And our first step towards that is actually the historic Franklin Street's Arts Paseo. We have the Art and Art History Building. We have the DCTF Museum. We have the music recital halls and the Mayor Theaters and things like that. So as you're thinking about this, if you could give us any guidance on how do we make that connection, or what should we be thinking about to further enhance not only the Paseo into the campus, but also that's going to be a natural connector to take us down to the train station. So just a thought on that. And again, if it's not appropriate, I understand. And then the only other piece of it I wanted to just throw out too, when the lighting issue came up, tying into the historic part of it, one of the things we are doing on campus is we are restoring to the original historic streetlights along the Arts Paseo, the historic Franklin Street Arts Paseo. So it might be an element we want to bring along into the downtown to make that connection also. Again, they're more for aesthetic purposes than creating an environment of event activity or safety, but it's an element that can help tie into the historic component of the downtown.
Do we
Again,
have photographs of those, or can you share?
I can get you photographs.
Thank you.
All we have to do is walk up the Arts Paseo. They're restored in there, but
Well, you can cast them. We have our group's got a bunch of photographs, but to Butch's point, you can cast them. They're on the street now.
Yeah, that we restored them on the historic Franklin Street Arts Paseo. So you just need a picture of them.
Yes.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great comments, Butch.
And I know it's out of our scope, but as Jim can attest, I've been thinking about that Franklin Street connection and up to Camino Real and the train station a whole lot. I mean, this little downtown needs to be connected to that transit hub and TOD. Otherwise, it's missing its main chance to be significant. And Franklin is exactly how that can happen.
Right.
And so we will certainly offer you some suggestions.
Great. And that's all we're looking for. As I said, there's been conversations about bad architecture and mistakes being made. And I'm talking a little bit out of school more personally than for the university. We made that mistake. We put in the new walkway through Franklin Street through the university and tried to represent the historic streetcar that went through. And there are 1/4 inch inlays of track into the Paseo, but nobody knows what they are, why they're there, or why they're important. So I think the university, even if we can be directed to say, this is how we can take some of the elements from downtown and carry them across the street, we will move forward with trying to get some of those pieces put into place. So there is.
I think the short version is that more Franklin Street going through the campus looks like Franklin Street, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to have a similar comment, Butch, when you asked, what threads could start to be brought through, and I would say all of them.
Yes.
So anytime a move is made, kind of think of what the counter move is on the other side of Franklin. Frankly, starting with Franklin forward, I think in the workshop the other night, there was a suggestion that the ground plane mural doesn't stop on the other side of Franklin, but it actually extends across, and it could even extend in. And I think, so just from the get-go, even in the pre-development activation, just start making those connections.
And see, we had started that process pre-COVID. We already have it funded, ready to go. We're just going through the university process.
That's great.
So our whole goal with Franklin Street, the historic Franklin Street, was to help stimulate interest in developing the downtown and showing people that connection can happen, that it could be a destination, there, rather than a street that you just drive down and kind of. So the university has been ahead of the city and the planning on this for many years. We haven't executed as well as I hope we would, being an artist myself, but we are willing and have been talking about how we continue to move forward.
Yeah, fantastic.
Awesome.
Can I say one more thing? That would also be the Mayor Theater and what the treatment of that Lafayette frontage is also a huge opportunity.
Yes.
Well, we're in the process on that. We're in the process of discussion about tearing that down and building a new facility.
Perfect.
So we don't know if that's going to be on, it could be on our property in the downtown. We don't know if
And-
that'll be on campus. We don't know. There's a lot of discussion about what possibly could happen with that facility, but it's outdated. It's not ADA accessible. There's issues with the building itself. So there is conversation of a replacement of that facility, which the other part of it is, and again, I don't want to take too much time on this, but there has been some conversation. If that building disappeared, what a nice second gateway into the university campus, into that beautiful
Yes.
Mayor lawn, over to the Mission Church, and tying the
Yes.
two together. So part of what we're
Absolutely.
trying to do is make that connection so the university sees it and says that's a good connection to have.
And whatever building and so connection absolutely would be fantastic. And whatever building or buildings replace that, and regardless really of their program, if they can be distinguished buildings that face Lafayette, that would just be enormously helpful.
Okay, because we've discussed whether or not that should just be open space, not replace the building, have open space and make it a
Well-
gateway. Or, so there's a lot of discussion happening on that
Well,
part.
yeah,
but
obviously that's up to you guys, but I mean,
Right.
what the campus already has a lot of open space. You got acres and acres of open space, which what we don't, I mean, downtown, God help us, is open space.
Right.
What we don't need is more open space in general. What we need is buildings to make a downtown.
And for us, the piece of it is, which is what we wrestle with, is again, connection. We want to be able to make that connection so that our 10,000 people who are on that campus have that comfort and connection to take it into the downtown.
I get it.
And part of it with the buildings is it blocks you in and keeps you on campus. So I'm not an architect, I'm not a designer, anything of that nature, but we've been asked, one of the tasks I've been given is to try to figure out a way, working with the downtown, to really make that connection that'll draw our population across the street and make them feel a part of the city.
We'll make a sketch.
Okay. I'm sorry to take us off topics, Chair.
But that's
That
not
is-
off topic.
no,
Don't
That's
worry,
not
off
off
topic.
you
topic.
don't,
That-
you don't
I mean,
comment too often. Don't worry. It's good dialogue.
the
Yeah.
two main things that this little downtown has the chance to connect to are the train station via Franklin and your campus. And then thirdly is Monroe, as was pointed out so well earlier as well. I mean, those are the things that this little downtown can be anchored to is the historic park via the green dumbbell, if I might call it that. You know, the two parks with a band with a bar between them, and the Monroe Gateway from the set from Monroe, Franklin to the train station, and connect to the campus. I mean, that's what's going to make people be here. Everything else is details.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry. I'll go to Rob. He hasn't spoken on this yet. So Rob, and then we'll hit back everybody on a second round.
Sure. It's great stuff. Super exciting to start talking about making a place here. One thing I wanted to first talk about was streets, and I understand the idea of the Grove. I'm not convinced that doing a double row of trees along north-south axis to connect to the park is the right solution, because that's the retail ready area and it can add more obstruction to those frontages. So I have a little concern about that. I mean, it's not a huge park that we're talking about. It's not like a central park. It's not so I think a single row of trees and possibly art, mixing that in. I like that idea, to give it a more variety on that promenade. But I do like the idea of, how do we strengthen it? So I think that's great. In terms of the street, widths, I have some concern over the 10-foot. I think I've said this before, that sometimes you have the trees in the same area that the parking is, so that you don't end up having sort of layering of parking, planters, sidewalk, and then so what you end up with is you have 4 different things, and you're not getting a benefit. You know, you can't really put seating into the sidewalk. That's not going to work. So I almost would rather, you know, do something more creative with parking and maybe reduce some of the parking by putting trees in strategic spaces, and then giving more potential to widen that frontage, you know, that actual area against the building. So again, I always said this, you know, 2 rows of seating is way more dynamic and interesting than a single. And one of those images you had a sidewalk and you had people sitting at a table, but they felt like they were in the sidewalk. And I know it was just as an example, but and it's not the end all, but it's really important. You know, I've been in Palm Springs, Cayucos, and we were in Pasadena on the last 2 weeks. And so I've really gotten a gauge, you know, the outdoor seating, you know.
So you're spoiled.
Yeah, I've been well spoiled to some extent, but 120 degrees in Palm Springs was interesting.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
On the idea of trees in the curb lane, in the parking lane, are you talking about Main Street specifically, or are you talking in general?
Well, again, what I worry about is not leaving enough. You know, sometimes you split things up so much that you really don't get a good anything, right? You kind of water it all down and you're like, ah, crap, we got it all here, but nothing is really spectacular, you know. And for me, I don't know, you know, it's just that it's the first thing that struck me. 10 feet, you know, hits me and says 10 feet is good enough for, you know, a 5-foot table, and maybe that's it if you're lucky, you know. And because you got to get people to walk around it, and sure, you can do recesses on the front, you know, in the building form to add that second seating, but really want to get it right. And so it's just, again, you get that point where, you know, you can have all the things, but nothing is special enough, right? You've checked the boxes, but you didn't create that really special space, you know, that sings, you know. And that to me is going to be the seating, you know, against the building. So that was relating to that. I think the public space, you know, you guys nailed that nicely. Again, outdoor movies and, you know, being able to do things like that, you know, and with the trees, I mean, I love trees too, but you got to be strategic about where they are. They're great blocking the western exposure. You just want to make sure you don't put them where they're, you know, messing up that beautiful sunlight when you want it, you know. So there are keys to where that can be strategically. In terms of building form and massing, you know, yeah, I mean, the horizontal, that whole podium thing, when that comes to, it just drives me nuts, you know, to see a podium in a downtown. And, you know, David, you alluded to that one town you're dealing with where one of the 4 developers wants to do that. And so getting more back to this idea of 25-foot building modules up, I mean, the spirit of old downtown is something, you know, that we still need to keep tabs on, you know, that it was pretty much 25 or 50 or something, you know, that's the way it was done. And the closer we can get to that, I think is going to give us some of that history back.
And the kinds of standards and guidelines we prepare can convey the scale, proportion, massing, but not require that it look like buildings that were designed in 1919.
Totally. No, I mean, going through,
you know, it's scale and proportion. Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, it's just going through Palm Springs. I mean, I'm a mid-century modern. I love it. I grew up in a house like that, and I just was blown away. I've never been to Palm Springs, but just amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah,
it is. And so I know Atisha, you know, is always like modern. I'm for that too. You know, I mean, it as long as things are designed well, that's what we want. You know, it can be eclectic. So, yeah. So that was building form. That kind of, I think, was it for me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good comments.
Very good.
Thank you, Rob. All right,
Excellent.
we'll go through. I think Atisha was in, or actually, I think Anna was the next one. Sorry, I'm trying to go in order, so I apologize if I go ahead, Anna. Atisha.
I can't say how excited I am that you really nailed it. I mean, the importance of that train station down Franklin through that university to our downtown, that's like biblical. That is just like, oh, you know, the clouds open. You heard us. You really heard the importance of that. My question was actually for Butch too. Over the last 4 or 5 years, as we've been pushing for this downtown, there's a barricade that Franklin stops at, and it's right there before El Camino. And you look over to the right, and there's a landmark there that explains
It's just crazy.
that are buried there. Now, is that why we can never ever open up that street that T-bones El Camino there? Is there a historical reason why that street is a dead end, Butch?
Well, I think it's historical Caltrans engineers. That's what screws up most cities.
Yes, that's what it is.
So there is no important burial site there that would prevent us from opening that street up? Well, that's great news.
Yeah,
Maybe we can bury that barricade.
Bury the barricade. I like that. And the other thing, I just want to echo what Rob was saying. I'm clearly a fan of parades. My 2 favorite parades were Santa Clara and Pasadena. I got to live there for 10 years. And I got to see its revitalization. It went through a down cycle in the 90s, but now it's pretty fantastic. Is there, because of parades, is there a place in this design for like a small carnival ride area? Because that's traditionally for 52 years, have that. Just curious. Favorite memory of my childhood.
Maybe that's a great. That's a great idea.
Why not have a little carnival space?
How about the Plaza Park if they move the library?
There we go. Carnival goes there. It's
Okay.
worth thinking about.
David, I'm against that library move. I've got to backtrack now. I'm getting, my phone's lighting up.
Yeah, I'm against it too.
All right. Atisha?
Yeah, sure. I think I would say phenomenal presentation, Diksha. Good job presenting it. This was really, really exciting. I think something everyone was looking forward to after going through a lot of boring economics and height and other kind of minutiae discussions. So great job. So proud of you. A few things I would say, and I'm always about like design, but how do you implement design? Like most of my comments are always coming from how do you implement good design? And I would say definitely like in placemaking, having discussion of popos and rooftops, like things that city can regulate. Make sure it's part of the placemaking discussion. It's not something that's left out, but if it's written in the plan, it gives Leslie all the power to implement it. So trying to make Leslie's life easy here. And any of other implementation tools that you feel are important to implement these ideas, because they'll just end up being pretty precedent images in the PDF. Other things again is like operation hours, because that will be a huge issue with the community living around it. If you want a 14-hour, 24-hour downtown, we need to bring it out and get the buy-in of the community now, then waiting it for later. So as you're designing your engagement questions, making sure like a longer operation hours, especially with single family homes with families, it's something they all agree to, not something we're gonna fight later. Butch, to your point of like students spreading around and also like looking into co-working, co-living issues, like having Wi-Fi, like can Wi-Fi be a public utility as a placemaking element? Here, similarly, like, we are showing big events, but what happens to these like, small artists who want to just like open up band and be there? I was at the farmer's market doing the pop-up for Franklin Forward this weekend, and there was beautiful music going on until someone came and told them that, hey, you can't do it. And they had to pack up and go, which was so heartbreaking because it was the best thing happening in the farmer's market, but some stupid permitting issue did not let him. So he had to literally pack up and go. So making sure that small artists who just want to, bring a few cans of paint and start drumming, they're not considered nuisance. And there's a way to not have that nuisance, but also manage them in our placemaking on a daily basis. Big events are great. And again, the placemaking for this downtown needs to start at the railway station. I cannot assert it more, like that's where the downtown gateway is. Yes, we think of it on Lafayette. It is at the TOD, it's at the station. BART is coming there, Caltrain is there, Amtrak is there. That's the future, that's a climate action plan, that's the gateway.
Well,
We
and,
need
and,
to extend it
and-
till there, whatever it does in this plan's recommendations.
and I think the old saying about if you can't lick them, join them applies. I mean, that development there is going to be bigger than your downtown. So you better be friends with it.
Yeah, so station needs to connect. That's where the wayfinding, signage, lights, all of the trees, everything just needs to connect all the way through. So, yeah.
Thank you, Alicia. Dan? On a second.
Okay, I'm restating this, but you guys have just done an excellent job here. David, you said, you know, to activate the public realm, and I think, you know, everything I've seen absolutely does that. So I love the retail perspective, the ideas on that. The one comment that I want to add is I had a kid from our group come in and he looked at the drawings that you guys had done before, and there's all these people on the street. And he said, well, where are they going and where are they coming from? And, you know, I thought about that, and that's like, you know, that's an excellent point on, you know, probably not for tonight. And I know retail and, you know, what we do with that is the last thing we talk about. This is, you know, getting close to the last thing. But I guess the question is, you know, if we want a strong anchor, be it whatever it is, are we, you know, does our Army right now start working on drawing that, you know, drawing those people in, finding out what kind of format they want for that first floor, because it's not going to be your mom and pop, you know, restaurant. It's going to be a different type of format. Is that something we should be thinking about as groups, you know, be it reclaiming our downtown, the quad, what have you, in drawing those folks in to come to you to talk about that? So, and I think that's it. And yeah, the last comment was on architecture and how do we incentivize creative architecture so we don't have the, you know, the same old that we're seeing in many, many cities. And many cities around the Bay Area, you don't see that. You see very unique deco that's new or deco-esque or mission, you know, as overdone as mission is done. You can see terrible mission style and then you see beautiful mission style. And how do you incentivize great architecture like that?
Well, one of the things that we usually do is A, not require historic styles, but B, we usually include guidelines for some of the more common ones. So the basic idea is you don't have to do a style, but if you're going to do one, don't screw it up. So we could put in mission, deco. I don't know if you want Victorian, but I mean Italian it, because there's beautiful examples of ways to stylize and modernize Italian it. Anyway, so we could put in some of the more likely ones and just you know, if you're going to do it right.
Exactly. Perfect. All right. And thank you all. Great job.
And I think a great outcome, thank you, Dan. Appreciate your comments. I think a great outcome of that issue would be if there wasn't a sameness. You know, it's not all modernist and it's not all you know, traditional, but if there's one developer that wants to do a really nice building that echoes a traditional style and does it really well, great. And then there's a really nice modernist building next to it. I mean, that kind of variety is what's going to make this downtown look real. and be a lot better experience, because otherwise it turns into Disneyland, either modernist Disneyland or false historicism Disneyland, and I don't think that's what we want.
I mean, there's a real simple way. I don't know if you can do it in a public document, but some colleagues of ours who pioneered form-based codes in the 80s and the early 90s had in their early codes just the requirement that two adjacent buildings couldn't be designed by the same architect.
Nice. I like
Yeah.
it.
Pretty simple.
That would be a great thing
Yep.
to put right in the
I
plan.
agree. I agree.
In combination with the widths of the building frontages, right? Those two things I think will do world of good for our downtown. Yeah.
And the basic guidelines are saying that the buildings have to have some level of restraint on their acrobatic fenestration and massing. You know, if all the buildings are shouting, you can't hear any of them.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, not to just dull it down to boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tricky.
Very.
Thanks, Dan. Rob, did you have additional comments?
Nope,
I had
that's
a few
it.
more.
Hand up.
I had a few more, just about architecture.
Okay.
Real quick.
ahead.
Library. I was frustrated the library was redone, but at least it's on one side of the park. So creating a strong, you talk about a grove, or, I think it's more important to create a programming on that north side that really strengthens and creates a sense of place, whether it's for outdoor movies. And there's also a plan right now to kind of, it might be ADA accessible, the bandstand, which frustrates me as well, because I think, it's an octagonal, I think, bandstand, which isn't great for performances. It's great for a band, but it's not really open. A rectangular with a longer open frontage on the long side would be way better, but there's opportunities there. So I kind of let it go. I think they did a nice job with the remodel. There's a community room, or a room you can use for community. The other thing is the food hall facing Lafayette, still sort of sticking in my craw, this really low slung, small thing just seems odd to me. In the image that you showed, it just felt like it was more like a kiosk element than it was in a, I'm not sure that something low slung there. I think something that has translucency or transparency is important, but I'm just not convinced doing something on a small stature there is the right call.
Well, as we get into the coding, we can take a fresh look at that.
Yeah,
we can look at some precedents for the possibilities. I mean, in the same way Butch was talking about across the street.
Mm-hmm.
With is that theater named after your family or the movie producer?
I wish I could claim that,
Or
but
both?
no. I come from a very simple family.
Yeah, me too. But in a parallel way, you want openness and connection, yet spatial definition. So we'll look at that carefully. That is that. I mean, that's a totally critical spot.
Yeah. I think it could be a gem of a piece of an architect. If we can get Frank Gehry to design it, that'd be fantastic. All right.
Yeah,
thank you.
Think Millennium Park. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Rob. Atisha, did you have your hand up for a quick comment? Or was it left up?
It's left, yep.
Oh, okay, no problem. All right, seeing no more hands, would the DCTF members like to go to public comment?
So moved.
All right. So I'll open up to the public comment. Unfortunately, I don't know if anybody noticed, I actually did get kicked off the Zoom, so I've lost all the chat. So Leslie, I'm gonna need help from you when we get to that portion. I can't, it doesn't refeed it. But
I did that
first. So I think Jonathan Evans had the hand up first. So go ahead, Jonathan. I don't know if you've unmuted him. Sorry, Leslie.
Sorry, I thought I did, but
there you go.
There we go.
Yep. I was muted that whole time. Sorry, I couldn't talk. Okay, so I'm going to try to cram a lot in because I know we're already at time. Early on in one of the first presentations, part of the presentation, there were some comments about having a bike share or scooter or other way to bridge that transportation gap between the station and downtown. I just wanted to comment that currently Santa Clara actually forbids these sorts of operations within the city limits. And it'd be great to understand a little bit about what's the status of these sort of services, and are we ever going to get a bike share or a scooter share or something? That's something we just woefully lack. You see all the dead bikes right there at Newhall Street because they turn off when you cross the border. I know from experience. Alleys and art, agree alleys are a good idea. You want to make sure the back of house is there and it's the back, and we have beautiful fronts. Denver also has his 1% for the art that actually ends up putting some beautiful art in the alley. So as you walk down the alleys, you can glance down them and you'll see little displays of things. And that's something that, maybe we should consider if we have like an art fee or something attached to downtown. There was recently, somebody mentioned the style guide. I think having examples of styles are great, but we have to be careful about styles that don't scale. Like mission style generally I don't think works for big buildings because nobody ever built a mission that was more than 2 stories or maybe 3 if you're lucky.
No,
right.
you're totally
So
right. You're
those
totally
things
right.
those things tend to become Disney World or stretched, and they look really terrible sometimes. And so if we're going to put things together, we got to keep that in mind as we look at what buildings are being built. A 10-story stall mission is going to be odd and probably not structurally sound. And I'm going to have to call everybody out about this library. And it was recently restored, but I think there's a kind of a distinct lack of anybody understanding the history behind that park and the library. So the library was built in 1955, and it is the first standalone library our city ever had. While today it is the branch library, it served as the central library for many years before Central Park Library was built, and has been featured multiple times in the Santa Clara Historic Home Tour for its history. While I do admit the architecture is maybe looking dated by today's style, it is, it was nicely remodeled. And I just want to reiterate that local branch libraries, they also serve as a place for services to residents of the area, and a third place, which gives you a place for gathering for the community to interact. And while the park itself could use a refresh, I really hope we're not looking at closing the library. And I'm glad you recognize that by saying, if you were to do something with it, you'd relocate it. But I think we need to consider historical significance.
Yeah, and I don't want to say I
library.
want it closed.
Yeah, but we should consider the historical significance of the structure before you throw it to the wayside. I also want to let some people know that there's that gazebo. There's a plan to refresh it by opening up one of the sides so it's more useful. But ironically, that gazebo is less historic than the library. It is a facsimile built in 1995, and the original lives in History San Jose. So if you want to go see our gazebo, go to San Jose, because apparently we moved everything there. And finally, I'm kind of personally more concerned about having a large theater block along Main Street, as I've seen theaters done very poorly in some downtowns and areas, and they create very non-active streetscapes. They're dead, they're scary, your show gets out and you're afraid you're going to get stabbed when you go down that side street that, doesn't have any shops, because they often become a dead space. So, while theater, I'd love to be able to go see a show in downtown Santa Clara, we have to be careful that whatever we do build keeps active activities all along that street. You want retail on the frontage, and if it's ever just a wall, that's not going to be good. So
well, there's fantastic examples of that we can show you. The Ventura Theater in downtown Ventura is a fine example of a theater that's side onto the street with beautiful liner shops. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to be careful.
Yeah.
So
completely. Cool, yes. Couldn't agree more.
Okay. So yeah, that's all I had for that long presentation. So thank you very much.
Crystal?
Adam, you're cutting off a little bit. You
Okay,
might want to
Mary,
repeat that.
you should be able to speak.
Okay, there we go.
Mary,
Okay, I unmuted.
Sorry.
First of all, I'd like to commend everybody for the excellent job that you've done tonight. And for the first time, I really feel like this is going to happen. And it's going to be beautiful. But I do have, can I say a reprimand for Dan Ondersek? Don't touch the library. That library has significant meaning to a lot of Santa Clarans. Well before—
I get it.
Well, and let me finish. Well before the downtown was raised, that library was a go-to for every Santa Clara student walking home 5 days a week. That was the go-to after school. It was a family where you took your family on a weekend if you had children as an outing. It has great significance. The park, I understand, needs a lot of renovation. I wanted the gazebo. I wanted to be able just recently to have music in the gazebo and have people that come in with picnic baskets and stuff and to listen to the music. And the city kind of put a kibosh on that. So, but I would say if you can make the walkway from the 10 blocks on the corner of Main, the corner of Homestead and Main, and that little walkway to the park, if you could spruce that up and make it to where that gazebo is workable and put some art into the park with a lot better trees, I think you'd have a beautiful place for people to gather and come to the downtown. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Mary. I see Patricia's hand. Next.
Hey, can you hear me?
Welcome, Patricia.
Hey.
Yep.
Thank you for having. I just want to commend the WRC team for actually capturing a lot of spirit of like all the feedback that we've had over like the last few months, and like I see a lot that reflected the plans being presented. So there's one. The next thing is I was gonna dogpile on the library thing, but Dan, you're good there. But I do want to drop a little bit more history about the park itself. If you want to look up the Battle of Santa Clara for the Mexican-American War, at the end of that battle, that actually they put all the horses there. That was the Old Mission Corral, and we have a plaque there to highlight that. So that's something kind of like really nice to highlight. I think the next thing, I think like a lot of the downtown proper things I already said. I want to say a little bit about transit. There are a lot of efforts right now with Caltrain I'm on the Caltrain Citizen Advisory. So like I've been actually trying to put in a word to try to get better connectivity from Caltrain into Santa Clara Station. So that would be an ongoing effort to kind of put the connectivity in. So there's that. That's all.
Thank you, Patricia. Are there any additional comments from public? Anyone want to raise their hand? I want to give you a chance in case there's an issue. Otherwise, we'll move to the chat comments from the public, but Leslie, I'll need your help.
Yeah, no worries, I got you.
I came back at 8:38.
Okay, so let's see.
Go ahead, let's.
The word library keeps appearing in the chat. I don't understand. Don't get that.
Dan Ondersack.
Yeah, Dan Ondersack. Yeah.
Hey, sometimes you gotta try to think outside of the box to get people talking. And
Yep.
maybe it works, maybe it doesn't.
Well, I found, yep, you're right.
Hey, you know what?
50-50 deal.
Finally, we're able to unite the community against yourself.
Okay, so let's see. So I have from both Jonathan and Patricia, just comments on walking through Franklin Street by the university. Reminds them of Fairmont and downtown San Jose, that the loud HVAC is very uninviting. So, making sure that we have those HVAC units where they're not going to be noisy for people. What else we have? Expand this a little bit. Keep going. Okay. Caltrans So talking about Caltrans, where Franklin meets El Camino Real. It's part of the site of the third mission, but it used to be a street. Caltrans shut it down to align State Highway 82, El Camino. We used to always, COVID rules don't allow for singing. That's good. We used to have music at the farmer's market. So maybe once COVID is over, singing won't be a problem anymore. A few thank yous. Everything's looking good. And yeah, that's all in the chat.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So is there a motion? Last call for anyone who wants to raise their hand and speak on the item. Just want to make sure. Okay. Is there a motion to close public comment?
So moved.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Butch. All in favor of closing public comment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, the ayes have it. Public comment for item 2 is closed. I do see one other hand. Matthew Reed, you want to go ahead and make some additional comments?
Thank you. You know, there are moments like this evening, I think they, you know, Adam said this was culmination and worth the effort. And people ask me about this process and I say, I think it's meeting 49. And so I really appreciate that. And you know, the presentation is really valuable and important. And the energy and the positive response is really important. Councilmember Jane is not here anymore. I see that Councilmember Watanabe is. I'm really pleased to see that because these moments are shared moments and I'm looking at 40 of us. And the reality is, and Councilmember Jane mentioned this, is that this is going to go in front of a group of decision makers who have not experienced this process. They have not experienced this evening. And I have a tremendous amount of faith in the power of persuasion of this group of people who've invested a tremendous amount of energy in this. But last week was very cautionary for me as well. And so thinking about how to translate this moment into something that is accessible to the council and to other folks in the city, I think is going to be very important. So that was my comment. Great moments get lost if they're shared within a small group, no matter how revelatory they feel.
Great
Well
insight,
said.
Matt. Thank you. Very well said. I know. I hope that you know, this plan is something that can be shared as it continues on, and then I know there's, you know, community groups that can share it amongst a larger population within the community. Make sure it gets out there so we don't get to the 11th hour like the El Camino Real plan. Because like you said, there's been an immense amount of effort and time, not only by the individuals on this meeting now, but a larger group of the community that's participated along the process. And I think it's, you know, really important to make sure that as large of a group within the community has insight and visibility on the process and the stages, so they understand that the thought has been put into the process and finished product, so they don't, you know, it calms their nerves. So that's great, man. Thank you. Are there, Atisha?
I would just second Matthew's comments, and I know we have a study session coming up with our council and planning commission very soon. I think next month in July, Leslie. But I just feel like we need more check-ins dedicated to our decision makers so that these 49 meetings don't end up in a 4-hour council meeting, but like there is a little bit more, you know, interactive breathing room, which is less formal, for them to understand the process and like not just talk to consultants, but like all the people on the DCTF more directly. So in our process, if we can make that room somewhere beyond some of the interactions we have with the consultant, planned interactions with the consultant, it will be important for council members to hear from this group, especially very directly, because I've invested last few months, but a lot of people have invested a lot more time. And I did try to attend most of the El Camino Real Council meeting, and I do, don't want this to go the same trail. So I would encourage city staff to figure out more ways to bring in our decision makers in the process sooner.
Is a joint study session possible?
Yeah, I mean, there's a joint study session coming up here in July, but yeah.
Will the DCTF be present?
Yes, it's going to be the council, the planning commission, and the DCTF all, yep. Everyone's going to be educated at the same time.
Leslie and Adam, would it be helpful if we just flashed up our schedule and kind of show where we are in this process and what are the next steps?
Sure.
At this point, it seems like it might fit into this discussion. Peter, do you want to just touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't have that study session on this calendar, so it feels like we should get together and make sure that we're.
I think the study session Leslie's referring to, unless I'm wrong, Leslie, is form-based codes.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
July 15th.
July 15th. Correct. And
got it. So we are this yellow dot in the middle, and looking toward, I think, a community engagement on this. It's our understanding that there's a desire to bring it on. I think it's being reinforced by this meeting to get this message out to the broader community and do that soon. We would anticipate DCTF then seeing implementation, and I think that's also coming out of this meeting really clearly as a strong message that we need to start seeing more about how these ideas are implemented. And so that would be the next topic that we would be involved with to come to the DCTF, potentially in July, and then bringing an admin draft potentially in September and a public review draft of the plan in October. Then there's going to be SQL analysis being done as soon as I think we get this framework plan. Now that the framework plan has been accepted, I think that really is a milestone and can kick off the SQL process. And that will be taking place even as we continue to draft the plan, the policies, implementation chapter, and so on. And aiming by this schedule to have being able to go to Planning Commission and back to the community with an open house, and to the Planning Commission in January of 2022, and to have an adopted plan in February. There's some unknown pieces here, which are, can we also integrate some additional elements of the early implementation into this schedule? So that's to be determined.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to help show where we're at and how much or where we're going to be with the final plan and what we have left to do. So thank you.
And how far we've come.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Jim. I really like that. Definitely true. It's a process, right? I mean, and it's
absolutely
it's good to take the time, because once this goes, it's going to go, hopefully. So a lot of pieces are falling into place. So is there a motion to close this item from the DCTF?
So moved.
Oh, sorry, I see another hand. Rena, sorry, I see Rena's hand.
Hi, everyone.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say that I think a check-in with the council is a really good thing to do pretty soon. And we typically want to get their sign off on the project description for our notice of preparation. And so that's a good way to bundle all of it together. So it's like a purposeful meeting that also results in, like something we just typically do, which is to, before we start on, the admin draft, we want to make sure we got the project description right. And that reflects our land use plan. So, or our land use framework, or preferred land use framework. So I think we can come back and look at where that kind of makes sense. We're about to go into the summer holidays, so it might be kind of when people come back. But I think it's a good thing for us to do on many fronts, as people were mentioning.
Thanks, Rena.
Great. So is that something?
Yeah, we can provide an update on after we look at the calendar and how everything lines up, meetings and such. We can give you all an update either by email or, at the next meeting. It all kind of depends on how it lines up.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I don't see any additional hands from the panelists. So is there a motion to close item number 2 for this evening from the DCTF?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of closing item number, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, item number 2 is closed.
Great.
So
Thanks,
we'll get to our
everybody.
final
Really helpful discussion.
Oh,
Thank you all
you.
so much.
Thank
No,
you
thank
very
you.
much. You guys are doing a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
So we'll move to our last item on the calendar agenda, which is the public presentation comments. In the public that would like to address the task force on items that are not on tonight's agenda.
I see one hand.
I see.
Jonathan.
And one from panelists, one from the public. So Jonathan, go ahead.
Hello, coming through.
Yep.
Yeah, Adam keeps breaking up, so it's hard to hear. So at the last Downtown Community Task Force meeting, there was a study session on the Surplus Land Act, and I thought the DCTF members and public would be interested to hear about a new state law, Senate Bill 466. This law has already passed the Senate and is now making its way through the Assembly. SB 466 is interesting because it exempts the city of Santa Clara from the Surplus Land Act for the property it owns at 500 Benton Street. For reference, this is the parking lot and city drinking water well located next to the historic Santa Clara train depot. The only development purpose at that location proposed at that location was a project from Republic Metropolitan to build a luxury dorm for Santa Clara University students. The exclusive negotiating agreement between Santa Clara and REMET expired back in November, so it's surprising the developer has had Senator Wachowski introduce this bill on their behalf. And the Senate analysis says that's the case. The Santa Clara Station area will also be important to the success of our downtown. I wanted the DCTF to know that a project which will underutilize the land near the station and could have a negative impact on the success and viability of our downtown revitalization may still be in the works. This is another example of why we need to have an updated station area plan. I also wanted to understand what this sort of bespoke legislation on behalf of a private developer may have on our future plans with downtown, given the city is a major landowner and will be subject to the SLA when the city chooses to develop its property. Does this mean the city will be able to have legislation passed to exempt itself from the state laws around land use and disposition for a downtown development? Thank you.
I have one comment, and I'm not pro or against, but read that law. It's one page. And it's ridiculous. Sarah did comment.
Jonathan, I would say I had similar question when I read the law, that how, if it's applicable to one parcel, why not other parcels?
Exactly.
And if it's applicable to other parcels, then we have been fighting SLA in downtown, then why do we have to fight SLA in downtown if we don't have to fight it on the station property? So I think it's a big thing. Either we expand it to all city-owned properties or we don't do it, because I just feel it's a failure of SLA in a big way. So I have exactly same question, and I don't know who from City Hall can help us answer, like what will stop it from not being expanded to downtown or other parcels, and and who defines the economic interest, like how the economic interest is defined, like is public health an economic interest, is access to transit an economic interest, or is the land value that the city is getting for as ground lease the economic interest? Like what's the definition of that economic interest?
One comment I wanted to make, which I think is, somehow the city gets into some of these exclusive negotiating agreements, and what's frustrating for me is why not open it up to all comers and say, what do you want to do here? Why go through an exclusive negotiating agreement with one party on a piece of public land, rather than seeing what other options are out there? And that's what the intent of the SLA is that you take public land, and if you're going to qualify it as surplus from a city, that you offer it up to affordable housing, state school, parks, and affordable housing developers first. So thank you for bringing that up, Jonathan. And I think everybody here should, and anybody listening in should read that proposed state bill. It's shocking that the community wasn't even notified about this, that this bill comes about all of a sudden. And, I'm thankful that somebody found it, but please pay attention to it. It's super important.
And it's a super fast read.
Yes.
So, which shows, quickly how ridiculous it is.
Yeah.
I can go with my public comment. So I just wanted to quickly update the DCTF on some of the activities that I know Deborah is missing, but Anna and I are here to update you guys on Franklin Forward. We were running 1 month of community engagement. Our survey is still on, so if you guys have not taken it, please take it. I'm going to post the link right now and share it on your Facebook. We have the last week to do it. And then we had a great coffee chat last week. Great comments, great input. We have about 122 survey comments. It is some of the big things. We did ask a lot of questions about the downtown, and few things that came out of it is like about only 60% of the people who were taking the survey knew that downtown existed in downtown in Santa Clara ever, and only 70% knew that there's a planning process going on. So there's definitely outreach gaps from the people we were able to reach, which was mostly social media, because we don't have funds to print and post things. It was mostly social media outreach that we reached out to people and have no clue of this process happening. So I think that's something DCTF can work on. Our next steps are, we're going to be applying. We are waiting for this community round, engagement round, and now we're going to be applying for a formal special use permit in next 2 weeks to the city staff. And we're going to have a list of asks, which is our conversations with the property holder, our trying to have one-on-one conversations with the property holder have failed. He's not interested in talking to us to bring, letting us paint his parking lot. So our specific ask is to city to negotiate that for us once the lease ends in April, and if they're renewing the lease, and then also looking for some regular funding from city council to support such community projects, because right now it's a lot of labor and it's not something that can be sustained in a long term if it's not permanently funded, like such art projects are permanently funded by the community and the city. So that's where we are with Franklin Forward. So if you have not taken the survey, I've posted the link in the chat. Please take it, post it on your Facebook group. We'll be happy to take a few more comments. Still, we are working on a special use permit. And I'm also posting the presentation we presented at the coffee chat, which has some of the summary of the surveys till that date. So if you want to review those survey results, I'm putting it right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tisha. All right, are there any other public comments? I don't see anything additional in the chat. Just some links that Tisha, you linked in. And I think Jonathan linked in some information about what he talked about, the bill. So is there a motion to close public comment from the DCTF member?
Moved.
Seconded.
All right.
Sorry, Butch.
All in favor of closing I should say public presentation, sorry. All in favor of closing public presentations, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. All right, the ayes carry. Is there a motion to adjourn? That's everything on
I
our
messed
agenda for
up.
this evening. So is there a motion
I messed
to
up the date again.
adjourn? Yeah, it's all right.
Every time I do it.
Is there a motion to adjourn the
So moved.
June 17th?
I'm Butch, I was waiting on you.
I heard Donna. I heard Donna
I
first.
move that
Is
we
there-
adjourn.
There you
Sorry,
go.
hold on. Who's making the motion? Sorry, I just
Anna.
wanna be
Anna was
clear about
first.
Leslie,
Anna,
sorry.
yes.
Anna's making the motion. Who's making this? Who's seconding the motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
I think Dan did.
I did.
Dan, okay. All in favor of adjourning tonight's June 17th DCTF meeting, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone from the public and staff for attending and staying with us.
There is
Appreciate
one
it. I
hand
know
up
you've
in
all had
public.
some long hours.
Great work.
Oh, Mary has her hand up.
Mary, put your hand down. We got to go eat. And if I hear about the library, I'm going to drive down there.
Damn. Oh.
Okay.
Already closed. Oh, okay. I'll take Leslie.
Oh, you cut out. Mary, did you have a question?
Yes, I do have a few comments to make.
We did already
And
close
it's
the public
regarding
hearing.
Jonathan's comment. One, I heard that this Tuesday, when the council is going to be considering the developer's request for the ENA to implement this bill. This Tuesday. And my thoughts on this bill is that there is no reason that the parcel should be treated different. This is a special interest project for our city and a very poor decision to make for both the city and Senator Wachowski. Low-income housing close to the transit corridor is a great idea, and it should be made available for working class who have to travel to and from work, not for the students whose university is in their backyard. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Great work. Thanks a lot,
Sorry
you
for my
guys.
internet connection. Sorry for my internet connection. I was down to my phone.
It's all right. You made it.
You did it.
The hotel kicked me off their bandwidth.
You know, go get a haircut. All right. Good night, everybody.
Have a
Good
good
night. Bye. Bye.